TFCon today, or special TFCon-ish edition?
Close this. There we go. What we're gonna do essentially is it was supposed to be like I guess a TFCon panel. I guess that's what people were asking me to kind of do, and I didn't really know what I wanted to. What I really wanted to talk about. I was honestly thinking before talking to you, I was honestly thinking of maybe just talking about like TFCon's past histories of exclusives or something, or I don't know. I was gonna play it by ear, but essentially what we'll do instead is we're just gonna have a Q&A with you, and people in the chat could ask questions, which I'm pretty sure if people who are curious start submitting your questions. Super chat will obviously get priority. I'm just sharing the link online to all the different social media venues, and then we are good to go. So first, in the meantime, Erin, why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you? How important you are to the Transformers band, past, present, and so on, and how'd you get started in the brand? Did I lose you?
Years at Hasbro.
There we go.
And 13 of them on Transformers, going all the way back to the Beast Wars transition to Cincinnati from Rhode Island, and then moved with it back to Rhode Island from Cincinnati, and all the way through the 4th movie. I did a little bit of designing, picked names, picked colors, did displays, a little bit of everything. Worked with Michael Bay. I was there, so I witnessed a lot of stuff, worked on a lot of stuff. Hopefully I have some answers and concepts about how we did stuff back then that people want to know about.
So what was, for people that don't know, what was the first thing you worked with in the Transformers brand? Because obviously before that you were in Kenner. You were working on, I remember you've told me, Batman and a lot of other different movie brands and stuff like that Kenner were doing. But when did you really were brought into, say, the Transformers brand itself?
Yeah, so the way it was structured at Kenner, there were teams, and teams had a leader and then marketing, engineering, and design on them. Previous to that, they'd been like structurally leveled, like engineers talked to engineers, and somebody relayed that to marketing, and it was a real game of telephone. So I came into a new era where they were team-based and everybody was in one little group and you were responsible for your brands. We had Batman, and in late 95, early 96, they were going to move the Transformers team from Rhode Island to Cincinnati, where they considered that to be the hub of their boys' toys, because that's where they also moved G.I. Joe at one point in 94, I believe. So they were consolidating, really. That was the decision. But it basically brought Transformers to the Batman team. I was a designer. I designed a lot of Batman toys. I got to come up with concepts and pick colors, and that was kind of the role back then. And we were scared as hell when Transformers was coming to our team, because we had no idea about the relationship with Takara. We had no idea about how they did any of that complex stuff. To be honest, it was very intimidating, and I remember a lot of old-time guys who did great mech tech stuff, Ghostbusters and superpowers mechanisms. They were like, there's no way I can do one of those, which was true and valid. There was no way we could have done those things, but we found out they had a visit, came out for a weekend. I remember being particularly in a alcohol-induced next morning moment. So I remember that particularly well, that they came in and I was very hungover.
With the Japanese?
With the guys moving from Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
Supposed to make a good impression on them about joining the Batman team, and here's my young ass a little hungover. Anyway, so that was my first exposure to like what was happening. So how Transformers and Batman even came into contact, and how I came into contact with that brand. So I basically sat next to the lead designer of that team early on. That was Chris Gross. He left the company a couple waves in, or a couple years in, of Beast Wars to be a private pilot. Another guy named George Bosnos came in to lead the Beast Wars brand, and he was a designer's designer. He really liked style, and he went to Art Center, and he really liked the kind of character designs I did. Mm-hmm. So he basically came to me to do the pitch drawings that then they would go kind of share with Takara about the direction they had hoped to go. Back then, toys was more technically and engineering based than maybe style and flair that it's become today. So he was fine not doing the fancy drawings and letting me, the quote unquote comic book type guy, do that kind of work. And that's when I did the Red Dragon and Beast, the Dinobot Transmetals 2. Basically designed and identified what Transmetals 2 stylistically, that blend of back and forth everywhere, was my first gig on Transformers.
So I always point this out with people. So I always get this kaiju vibe from your art style, and I've always kind of linked that with it's coincidental that you started with Transmetal 2s, which had a very, I don't want to say horror, but a very monster kind of look to them. Transmetal 2 Cheetor, even Transmetal 2 Dinobot. It was very a very clash of organic and robotic, but very Frankenstein kind of. And I see a lot of your current style with that. You know what I mean? Oh, we're losing connection there. Are you okay with the connection there?
Yeah, so the monstrous stuff is where I lost it.
Okay, there. I was just saying how we had your style was very kaiju kind of based, and when you look at Transmetal 2s, you kind of have that same kind of monster kind of look, universal monster, that Frankenstein kind of combination of mechanical and beast. Do you think that had something to do with it?
My interest in kaiju, did it influence my designs?
Yeah.
Absolutely. They're very mean looking. Dinobot particularly is angry and scary looking. He's got fangs out. Cheetor is probably the scariest looking hero we've done, if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
And Megatron has those beefy thighs, very much Godzilla kind of influenced those kind of designs anyway. So yeah. I tend to draw, and I think I've said this many times, but I did all the Megatrons and a lot of the villain characters. I was the guy that did all the, what I like to think of the sharp and pointy guys, and that reflects in my art, and that reflects in the types of characters I designed. So that's what you're seeing too. I tend to have a angry, dark, or sharp vibe to my work.
So then afterwards, after Beast Wars, so then you went on to Beast Machines. How much of an influence did you have on that brand specifically?
So I shifted. So Beast Machines is another example, and I will add Transtech here, that things were happening in the offices next to me. So I worked on Transmetals 2 and did that little bit, and then I think George left and somebody else was taking over. And so a different team internally was doing all the development work for those designs with Maidenframe and Takara at the time.
Yeah, there was.
So I was watching. Watching it in the office next door.
Yeah, there was Drexhall was one third-party company. Yep. There was a few of them, to my knowledge.
Yep. And so I really came on more full-time and responsible-wise in the fall of 2000. Hasbro made the decision to close the Cincinnati office and move a sizable portion of the staff to Rhode Island. And almost everybody connected to the Transformers brand for one reason or another were Cincinnati-based people, and chose not to take that leap to Rhode Island with the company. And the fact that I'd worked with Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm, So that's what I was doing during part of that time too. I was on Star Wars during Beast Machines development. I was working on episode 1.
Okay.
So I at the end, when they decide that those guys aren't going, I was the right level of designer that had done partnered product and development before, which was a big deal with the Takara deal, that they really wanted someone that understood how to represent the company and represent the goals and be able to be a people person, so to speak. So I was the right person for that, and I asked for that job. I knew the guy that wasn't going to go, and I said, hey, if Brian's not going to go, I'd love that opportunity. So it's really the best thing I ever asked for in my life. One of the best things anyway.
Well, it definitely opened a lot of opportunities for you. That's for sure.
Absolutely, and it was one of the best things about Transformers for me. Going back to the monsters question is, there's no one telling us what it should be. If you work on Star Wars or any movie related licensing product, you get photos, you got actor reference, you got schematics, whatever it is, and you're just you're bringing a toy to life.
Yeah, it's not a lot of freedom.
Not always, and I really enjoy creating characters and all of that. So Transformers, and then ultimately G.I. Joe later, was awesome for me creatively to be a part of, because I enjoy that aspect of creation, and not every designer did either. So
you mentioned Star Wars Episode 1, and it actually clicked something in my mind. For years, a lot of times in the Transformers fandom, the lack of success of the Episode 1 toys led to, some people say, the downfall of Kenner. Do you have any confirmation of that, or do you know anything, like a little bit of inside baseball there?
I don't think anybody could say for sure, one helped the other or not directly, but the Star Wars deal was very lucrative. The way it was written for how it was written was how it was written. I'm not a deal guy, so that's up to other people.
Okay.
But when Episode 1, when various whole product categories didn't do as planned, not just toys, but any number of categories, there was a gap for a few years where those companies had to recoup that outlay of cash. Okay. And everything went a little, everyone looked for ways to save money or not keep spending the money waiting for Episode 2 to maybe get it back. So one of the decisions, it seems, was, well, let's just get everybody under one roof and worry about Episode 2 that way. Could be a way to look at it, because they also moved Odds On and Galoob, Kenner to the Rhode Island office at that same time.
Galoob especially, I remember, was pretty much merged with the whole Micro Machines division, which Star Wars practically was dominating at that time.
Yeah, they got consumed for sure. So that's what was happening at that time. And I think the writing was on the wall it was smarter to consolidate. Were going up everywhere, and they wanted to harness the power of their brands, and they wanted to do it under one roof. And ultimately, Transformers and My Little Pony and Pet Shop and a couple others, were the result of that effort.
So then we go into the new millennium. We go into 2000 with Robots in Disguise, Car Robots, as it was called in Japan. And how much of an influence did you have on that brand? Obviously, it was a Japanese designed brand, but how much of, let's say, like when it was ported over and imported, how much of that was you? Yeah,
I was on what I would call the transition team early, because that stuff actually came into our building, I would say around the same time we were notified that we'd be leaving. So we started working on it in late summer, probably, of 2000. And what that meant was, what items are we going to use? What items are we going to bring into the line? What's the show about? Where can we get it placed? Starting picking names, because at that point we hadn't used some of the classic car names.
Well, there was a lot of old trademarks that came back, and a lot of new trademarks that were created for that.
Yeah. So that was an opportunity to kind of do all that. I often call that a stopgap, kind of effort because we were parallel pathing Armada from late 2000 on while I was transitioning and adapting late fall or early fall, like I said, late summer, picking names and you know, all that kind of stuff. And then by the time February came around, we were in Rhode Island, and I was responsible for changing the audio files for the Optimus and Ultra Magnus.
For the voices inside the toys, yeah.
Yeah. So
for people that don't know,
Superpower Convoy.
Yeah, for people who don't know, the car robots versions of Fire Convoy and God Magnus obviously spoke Japanese, even when they combined. So that had to be localized, for a better way to put it.
Yeah, it had to be transitioned. Yeah, exactly. So, and then we added things in like Battle Unicorn and Cerberus. Or whatever.
Bruticus,
so,
they called him.
Bruticus, that's what it was. Yeah. And I did the really questionable, military set redeco.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't know what I was doing. That was a little intimidating to be able to redeco a G2 mold or G1 mold, really.
Well, it was a very interesting line in a lot of sense that you first take the Japanese component where all the Autobots were these original molds, and then the Japanese side of the Decepticons were with the exception of Megatron himself, who was a new mold. Everyone else was rehash stuff. It was either G2 molds or old Beast Wars molds or old Beast Machines molds.
That's how we got the Shark. Yeah.
The Shark 2 was Cyber Shark from Transmetal 2. Yeah. It was a bunch of stuff.
It was a catch-all, and we've talked about last week. I was typing in on it, the Gal Gaigar stuff. So we were looking at that stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
And at that time, we got sent a big box of the, car robot stuff and that whole Brave and Gal Gaigar and all that stuff. So we thought we were going to maybe blend all those tools into this effort as well.
So what you're trying to say...
In the end, we did not have access to them.
So, but just to have it on record for people, was a chance that some Gal Geiger molds could have ended up in Robots in Disguise?
That was the hope Hasbro had based on the toys that Takara sent us. Once we started getting into it, we were told, well, actually, we don't have the rights to give you to those toys, but the technology is interesting. Let's talk more. And, we could talk about how that became Energon-esque and things later.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But,
there's a lot of...
Yeah, that was all that product came into the office at the same time. And also a really weird line that Takara did with, like, kind of metallic chromed animals, figures that rode them. I had a really cool sea turtle that some dude rode on the back of the sea turtle.
Well,
they sent us a lot of weird stuff.
There were Zoids.
No, it wasn't Zoids. It was a Takara product.
Dino Zone, I think, was another one. I'm trying to remember. There was quite a few weird ones on Takara's side back then.
Yeah. But,
and Web Divers. That's another one.
Yep. I worked on Web Diver. We looked at transitioning. Was there a way to bring Web Diver to the States? And, long story short, obviously it didn't, and because the reason it didn't was the price point and the simple gameplay really killed it. Because at that time, Walmart had a lot of plug and play games that were a lot cooler and a lot cheaper. So it was like kind of no way that was going to work in our market anyway.
So then, of course, now we go into the bulk of it. So now we go from Robots in Disguise in 2000, 2001, to now the Armada Micron project, Micron Legend, in 2002. So how did that all come about, really?
Yeah, so the same decision that says, hey, let's bet on ourselves. Let's bet on our brands, Transformers particularly, and My Little Pony. They wanted to get back to basics. So the new president, Brian Goldner, came in and said, the stuff you've been working on, which was Beast Machines, and what would have been Transtech, is pretty out there, pretty crazy, pretty high design. It doesn't speak to anything classic. I'm paraphrasing. It doesn't speak to the classicness of the brand. Let's get back to basics. Let's get back to vehicles. Let's get back to classic Autobots versus Decepticons. Erin, go make that happen. Okay. So that led to a meeting that they had in Japan, I want to say in October, November. There was always a trip around then, that they got shown the idea of MicroMasters again. A little bit different, but little cars, but still that same idea. And Goldner hit upon the idea of, well, if we could make them a little smaller and integrate them and make them collectible, you know, all like Pokemon, as you've said in the past, you know, could we create a consumable price point to get people excited about Transformers in a different way? You know, there's always the fear in the toy industry that, you know, fans would love a consistent scale and technology base and price point for a long, long time. Well, in toys, it changes every year, you know. So they were really looking for a way to get away from just it transforming as the focal point of the feature. You know, just, hey, it goes from truck to robot. Yeah, we've been selling that for 20 years.
Well, that's also kind of been the evolution of Transformers, because when you go back, obviously, way before you were with the company, but like with Generation 1, that was the gimmick initially. And then, obviously, then, now it's Headmasters. The heads transform, and Pretenders. Now it's like human stuff. And then...
Yeah, you got to keep going. Yeah, it's like a fashion line. Every year you need the new thing. So we hit upon like, well, this collectible, maybe somehow they can interact with the bigger Transformers. So it still hadn't been established that they would be little plug-in things that would activate weapons. That's the work that I had to do separately with Takara to see, you know, how could we make this happen, you know. So that was, they came back from that trip and told me that was their plan, and I had to then start working on what does a collectible small end car line with, you know, all the price points we ended up doing, kind of how's that start to look and lay out and get back to classics or basics. So that was my initial task while we were then moving to Rhode Island over those next 2 or 3 months. And then by the time I got to Rhode Island, there was a new marketing person, 2 new you know, all the other guys that had been working with me in Cincinnati doing those adaptions on RID and maybe brainstorming names and things. They were gone. They were no longer with the company. And we started it kind of brand new. So I was working on Armada pretty much consistent with RID that whole time. But I don't know where you want to start with that.
Well, I guess in the case of Armada, like, when did you guys really decide that you wanted to have something that integrates with the robot as opposed to just like, because obviously you said started with MicroMasters, the collectability, which really was what MicroMasters even were in the late 80s, early 90s. They were that, you know, 4 in a pack collectible kind of thing, kind of doing almost what Micro Machines were doing with Galoob. But when did they really decide that they want to marriage these small little collectible cars and robots with the larger bulk ones? When did that come up?
Yeah, so when you're pitching these kind of ideas, sometimes you can pitch them conceptually to get people in a mood, all right, versus a product. You know, if you don't have it yet identified, sometimes you have to romance it a little bit. So I went into the room. I knew the little guys were going to be compatible with the big guys somehow, and that they were going to be helping level them up. And I think you can see in the first wave of the Minicon 3-packs, I think we thought they were going to level up as mini weapons. Yeah, that was the first wave, and then multiple waves after that, we lost that idea.
Yeah, you could see that initially. Like, the early engineering, especially with, I think it was the Destruction team, where they all had these little, like, I guess, gears under each one of those Minicons. So it added extra play value with Cyclonus. You see it a little bit with Jolt, too. Jolt had multiple functions on Hotshot. And you know, so you see those early ideas,
So we wanted to kind of get people in the mood. So I had Draxel Jump, so Ken Lashley, do an image for me of, like, you know how, like, you used to see that old footage of boxers getting hit and, like, the sweat would fly off of them in the light, you know, kind of some famous shots like that. Well, I postulated, like, well, what if robots were fighting, and when they got hit, little robots were flying off of them, you know, because they were part of this thing's larger structure somehow, you know. And that image, while it wasn't what happened in the toy line, that image started to solidify people's idea of, oh, there's these little things that live in as part of Autobots and Decepticons, and okay, we can shoot projectiles with that idea. We can make lights happen with that idea. You know, the classic toy stuff.
Yeah.
You just need that little bit that kind of gives people like, yeah, that makes sense. You know, that's a, you know, fantastical robot story. Let's do it. So Takara came back in, I want to say even April, May, with some initial models that had some of the beginnings of what happens if you put a little MicroMaster onto a little car and what could pop up or out. So they started making what we just call breadboard models, development models. They weren't scaled to be costed, or you've seen some of them with different heads and things on them that we've cobbled off other Beast Wars toys and stuff.
Yeah.
To show proof of concept, basically, to go, is this what you mean when you say, let's take these little guys and add them on and power them up, and you know, and we were like, yeah, that looks good. And so that was the beginning of what I would say is the agreement of, that's what we're going to do for Armada. We're going to make these little guys, and that's about the scale they're going to be, and these are the types of plug-in, the male and female kind of plug we're going to use, and these are the types of features we expect at each, you know, the scale and movement to be. So from there, the hard work happened in the summer of 2001, and that's when I was over there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, living in the dormitory, going item by item, and making decisions about designs and feature and scale and allegiance and all the things that we would go back and forth on from an internal group as well as a partnership with the Takara. And that was where Wave 1 and 2 really got nailed down and figured out.
Now the next,
so that was a big, big one. And then color got done around Thanksgiving. I did not go home for Thanksgiving because I had to do the Wave 1 color guides for Armada. That's all I can remember about that year because it was a blur.
So at the big thing with Armada 2 is it also gave us our first ever Unicron toy, which was a big watershed moment for the Transformer collecting world. How did that come about? How did the Unicron topic come up? Because up to that point, all we had from a technical standpoint, we had a bunch of prototypes that never got off the ground from G1, a bunch of prototypes from Beast Wars Neo that never got off the ground, and a statue from BotCon. That was about it. How did this finally happen?
So one of the aspects about Brian Goldner coming in and Armada overall and what became the Unicron trilogy was that decision to co-develop again with Takara all the products and programming related to Transformers. For whatever reason, that situation kind of fell out of favor, and they were more of a development house, I guess, for Beast Wars because they weren't marketing a lot of the topic for a whole different discussion.
Yeah, totally.
But when we ultimately decided to get back together, it was nice days when I did those drawings for George and was happy that I was the person going to be put in charge because he felt like he already had met me and knew me a little bit, which was nice. That was very pleasant because he really didn't know me that well at that point, given who he is. So we because of that co-development, Hasbro had to basically do something that most toy companies wouldn't do, and we accepted the Japanese development needs, which is 52 episodes of entertainment. Most American television programming or Western programming is 13 or 24 episodes, maybe 36 if something's one and done kind of thing.
Oh yeah, like even up to that point with Beast Wars.
If you looked at Beast Wars, it used to be 13, 12,
it was
20.
It was 26 and then two 13 seasons after 2 13 episode seasons after that.
Yeah, so it really what that did, having 52 episodes and basically it created a 16-month calendar for the brand, which meant that there was a second Christmas that really needed to have something be landed. So when you're making these television shows or programmings, if you can, have a signature item around the holidays, obviously that's ideal. And they wanted to make a big splash. We had this long show that we were going to be airing in the Western market for a year and a half, really, whereas Japan would air it all in a year. So we just needed some stunts towards the middle end to have people stay involved or interested. And Unicron was the thing that we want to do something big. We want to do something impressive. And it just came up kind of organically, like, well, let's do Unicron. Like that would be a statement, Takara certainly thought that was cool. I thought it was very cool.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
It was a very big deal with a lot of fans back then, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I probably don't appreciate from the opposite side how cool it was. I was probably just in my own little, hey, that's cool, I get to do a Unicron, not thinking of the how cool that really is for the brand. But so we hit upon it. The designer on it in Japan worked really hard to make all of that a reality. I did the deco guide over Christmas, and the painter also painted it over Christmas, the break, so that it would be ready for a photo shoot or toy fair or something, because it was right on the edge of our development timing. Anyway, so no, it was very cool to be able to do that. I think it worked pretty well with the Minicon play pattern. And it wasn't all that much of a compromised Unicron, all things considered. When we're reinventing characters or re-featuring old characters, sometimes they don't always look like their original silhouettes and things. And he turned out all right, I think.
Oh, well, he definitely, he was one of those toys that, despite the fact that he technically was a character for that universe, Generation 1 fans who pretty much only collected Generation 1, they bought it. People who really loved Beast Wars and as a result, collected Generation 1 as a result, bought it. And then if you were just some kid who was growing up with Transformers and Armada was your first taste of anything Transformers, they bought it too because it was part of the story and integrated into it in the play pattern. So it really hit a lot with people. Obviously now, you're going to say, sorry.
Yeah, the only thing about that item that is a kind of a honest to goodness bummer is that, and this is history right here. At some point, they worked long enough on the movie Transformers Unicron that they got a DAT tape of Orson Welles' audio.
Yeah.
Okay. So Yoke-san was pretty confident that he had that DAT tape somewhere in the archive of Orson Welles' actual sounds and things that weren't also in the film that we might include in that product somehow if we were able to get rights of Orson Welles, obviously. But we were never able to find that DAT tape. So one of the mysteries that I am left with from my time on Transformers is, does that Orson Welles tape survive?
Imagine.
And one of my handles obviously is Orson, so I'm intrigued by whether or not that tape actually exists. So I'm hoping. I still communicate with Yoke san, and I'm always optimistic I'm going to get an email one day that says I found it.
Well, I've always felt, like right now, not to go off on a tangent, but I've always felt that now that there seems to be this resurgence of Transformers Generation 1 reissues through Walmart. And, I mean, there's U.S. patent pages and everything of that first Unicron prototype. And if Yoke-san ever finds that DAT tape, that could be such an excuse to bring back that old prototype.
Oh, yeah. You would want something that crazy.
You'd have to do it with the original prototype, even though it's ugly, but just, make it happen, and that would be crazy. But that would have been amazing. That would have been amazing to have, audio. Orson Welles, who at that time had already been, I think, 15 years had passed since he passed?
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, easily. Yeah.
And then to have product that has his voice in it 15 years after the fact, like
Yeah.
that would have been crazy. And especially considering up to that point, to my knowledge, I think the only Transformer toy that had an official voice actor's voice attached to that product was Gary Chalk recorded for his Air Attack Optimus Primal, the Supreme one that was used in Robots in the Sky. That was the first time a voice actor was actually used for his character and product, as opposed to, I mean, you could tell me whoever was doing the recordings for the G2 stuff or.
Hold on. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, so say that again.
No, I was just saying, like, whoever was doing the recordings for, like, I guess the generic voices for G2 Mech.
Yeah. Well, there was a local guy. The toys used to be very, get it done. No big deal. Whatever it looks like, right? If you go back to some of the 70s toys and stuff. So, yeah, there was kind of a local guy that would do all the voiceover stuff. We would just call him up, and he would do all the different voices. And so we didn't have to deal with the actors and things, which usually didn't want to participate, cost too much, had union rules, or needed facts and stuff that just didn't apply to the costing and timing that we were working with. And that's why it usually didn't happen.
Interesting. That I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it can get quite costly to have one guy go to a booth just to say, I am Batman.
It's true.
So you kind of avoid it in the toy industry if you can, which is a detriment.
Well, it's that measure of art against business. I mean, you want to artistically create best thing, but then there's the business side. Yeah,
I'll honestly say that the effort that usually is needed and the money outlay to have like George Clooney be on a Batman product, or even, can you imagine Jim Carrey doing the Riddler and stuff? It's a nightmare. I mean, they don't really want to do it. They think it's a get-rich-quick scheme. It's outside their normal deals, so they're able to really skim if they want to. And it makes it, not unlike some of the deals with Transformer cars, at times, really, really easy to walk away from something that just is too cost-prohibitive or hassle to execute.
Especially when you could just tweak a little thing
Ferrari.
Here and there. Yeah. Well, Ferrari, Porsche.
Hello. I'm talking to you, Ferrari.
Yeah, Ferrari's been a headache for everybody. Hot Wheels, every company practically.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? So then we're exiting Armada, and we're going into Energon. But before we go into Energon, there was also a whole other line that started to bubble up. And that was the Universe line that you guys started doing.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
Well, opportunity. Obviously, the decision to go back to basics worked, both in RID and then with Armada. It brought, if you remember that time, it brought back the Autobot and Decepticon logo in popular culture. You started to not feel like it. You started to feel like the 80s were back a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
The reissues started to come out around then, too, I think.
Well, just to cut you off.
It was getting cool.
Well, just to cut you off for a second, I almost forgot to mention, around that time also, Dreamwave Comics did their Generation 1 Transformer comic.
That was very cool.
Which was
slick and modern.
And it was actually quite pivotal because it put Transformer #1 of the G1 book, #1 selling book, issue #2, #1 selling book, Armada comic, #1 selling book, War Within comic, #1 selling book, where it really started, here's Transformers that never was beating Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men in the comic sales ever, even when it was, Marvel back in the day with Generation 1. And then Dreamwave came during that Armada time and did that. And I think it really put them on the map from a pop culture standpoint, because around that same time, you had the X-Men movie, you had the Spider-Man movie, and here's Hollywood looking at, comic books turn into movies, it makes money. And then the Transformer brand, perfectly timed 2001, 2002, because of Dreamwave, comes in and tops the charts. And not just once, many times. The Armada book was a #1 selling book on the Diamond list, which is when you think about it, it's wow, that's crazy when you think about it. And but
no, I mean you're absolutely right. I do gloss over a lot of that.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. It just
I worked on.
No,
it's good to remind people because it was the full court press. It wasn't just we were making a toy line with a show with the car. It was getting licensing up and running. Comic book partner that was going to do a good job and with a modern art style and everything was important, and ultimately IDW fit that same build. And it was it was an exciting time. It felt like there was a lot of potential, a lot of celebratory kind of feelings around this thing being back or having elements of it back. So that was very cool. That was a lot of fun, good times, which ultimately got us to those bigger discussions with movies and Hasbro Studios and all kinds of bigger stuff.
So again, to go back, sorry to cut you off before. So to go back to Universe. So Universe.
So Universe. So we got successful, right? So Armada and everything was working, and sales being sales, like, hey, maybe there's more money to be made. What can we do? And Hasbro and Kenner particularly, if you think of how they operate, it's a lot about segmentation of brands, and they try to offer a little bit for everybody if they can. So the segmentation of this was, hey, we got the show on Armada, and it's the Minicon focus, and we're going to roll into Energon, which is going to just have a line that's more story-based, where we do some more radical decos, maybe tell a story that's more fan-oriented. I don't want to say collector-oriented, but if you kind of are just in the world of Transformers, you can read along and kind of have a fun romp. And if you want to go deeper, you can do that too. And it was just a way to use the tooling catalog in a clever way, I would say.
Oh yeah, it was completely
be able to give stores some exclusives and get a wider shelf presence for the brand in our anticipation of ultimately the movie, trying to keep gaining ground.
Well, around that time, especially because I find that when we were going into Energon, I felt that there was such a huge brand growth at that time because you had the comics, you had the cartoons, and the comics were doing very well. The cartoons were I mean, if it was still on the air, clearly people were watching it. And then you had the Universe line you were going to be going into, and we'll get into it after we finish Energon, but Alternators, so...
Yep.
Well, we'll get into Energon, I guess. So Energon, what was the germination of that, pretty much?
Yeah, so, it's a classic example of, hey, something worked really well, and how do we repeat it? There's two ways these things go. I think you brought it up last week. When things are going great, how do we keep it going? When things are not going so great, what the hell can we do? And it's very, it's very open. So Armada was successful with Minicons and that overriding feature message, right? Take these guys and blossom your toys. So they were looking for another overriding feature kind of statement for Energon. We knew we were going to have to change the price dynamic, and we couldn't add a extra little car kind of thing anymore. So we hit upon the Energon weapons and the little sigil. I don't even remember what we called those things that went over top of the Autobot.
It was an Energon chip, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we called the chips. I don't know what we called the Cybertron ones then. Tokens, chips too.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Well, those were keys, actually. Those were cyber keys.
That's the cyber keys. Yeah, that's right. And I apologize. These things.
It's okay.
We pit. I will say this to everyone. For any toy you ever see from a classic toy line, where it's feature and partnerships and licenses and stuff, there's all kinds of things, directions you can go, and ideas that are explored and presented, in some cases models built and everything, that literally go nowhere. So we just hit on this idea because of Gal Gaigar. We had still had that on our brains of those combos, the combo characters, the cement mixer and the crane and those guys. And we like that idea. Maybe we can get the Autobots to combine somehow. And what if they all could combine? And what if you could make a million different combinations if you had all the figures and be able to put them all the different ways? We just kind of got off on thinking that was cool because it was a feature to talk about, not maybe thinking about, was it the best fun play or not?
And there's also that you know, the collectability standpoint, because someone buys one deluxe Transformer and they see on the back of the packaging here it's compatible with all these others, so that encourages more purchase.
You hope.
Yeah.
I think in the end, you know, I think all you guys, it's been clear to me over the years that most people, if they like the combo play, it was fun for a little bit, but it really isn't how they displayed the toys for Energon, or, you know, it was more of a kid idea, I think, than cool Robo Mecha kind of display stuff. Now the Decepticons are a different story. I think they're cooler from that standpoint. But we were trying different stuff. So I should add here that during Armada, it was largely me working with Takara to execute the first several waves of that. And then I had 3 different co-ops during that time. Joe Kide was one of them, and Eric Siebenahler was another. Another guy named Chris was another. That helped me do some decos and a little bit of designing on Armada. But then by the time Energon came around, Eric had been hired full-time, and he started taking on more and more of the design responsibilities. And that's another delineation. He did a lot of the Autobots in Energon, and I did a lot of the Decepticons.
So that's why the Decepticons were so good?
Well, no, I like the pointy guys again. And if you know Eric Siebenahler's work, he likes big, blocky chins.
Yeah,
and
well, that comes across especially.
Square shoulders, football player-looking guys, whereas I like the skinny, sharp, you know, bladed-looking dudes. So it worked out that he would do Autobots and I would do Decepticons, and that worked out really well.
So another thing with Energon that was an interesting facet of it that would not be revisited for a while, when you guys introduced combiners, like 5-team combiners, bringing back Superion and Bruticus and the Constructicons, how did that come about?
You know, we were always... this is going to be a strange answer, I think.
It's fine. Strange answers are always good.
Yeah. As a designer of a classic brand, you're constantly asking yourself, should I add new or should I honor the past, right? There's always an easy gimmick to go, oh, we should do this character here. And there's other times where it's like, let's just come up with something else. And I say all that a little bit to say, like, we're just trying to...
Well, because the way that I saw it, it was like combiners. This is something that, you know, the last time we had it was...
Yeah, that's a gimmick where, you know, towards the middle end of Energon, it's like, what else can we do? Mm-hmm. And we were probably going to a lot of bot cons and hearing from fans and people, you should bring back combiners. You should bring back combiners. Are you guys ever going to do Superion? You know, so on and so forth. Because we were starting to do, you know, homages or bring back actual characters. So I know the drumbeat was high on that, and that was probably a good featural concept for marketing to get behind. It's probably nothing more than that.
I guess the same thing kind of applies to, I guess.
But we definitely...
Well,
what?
I was going to say that I guess the same thing kind of applies with Omega Supreme that came later in the line, too. Going back to that, like, I guess, Christmas item that you always talk about. So.
Yep. Yeah, and I think whether it was smart or not, we got it in our head that on some of these kinds of items, well, if people recognize a little bit of the character, so Ultimate, let's say Omega Supreme, you know, that will be better than a brand new character at that price point that no one's ever seen. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the concept we held for a long time. In Cybertron, we broke that, certainly. Yeah. But there was a little bit of that always in the back of our minds after, you know, I get a lot of credit for having an era where we were allowed to create new robots, new names, new characters that have become part of the Pantheon now. And that has kind of atrophied, right? Now it's very much protect the names and very classic characters. And
there's this
stuff like that.
There's this great image that a fan did years ago, and it was what if Beast Wars came out today? And it was a picture of the catalog, and all the names of all the characters. It's like Cheetor would have been called Prowl, Optimus Primal would have been called Optimus Prime. They would have just played it safe. And Rhinox was called Ironhide. Like it was clever because it is true that today they would have never done that. They would have never went, oh, we're going to call this guy Rhinox. We're not going to call this guy Dinobot. We'll call him Grimlock. Just play it safe.
Yeah. Well, hey, if I can go back all the way to the beginning, I like to share this story.
Go ahead.
That not only did Beast Machines have some issues, but remember Machine Wars?
Mm-hmm. Oh, if we skipped Machine Wars.
I think that was a KB exclusive.
KB exclusive, 1997. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of analogous to all this stuff. The Transformers brand had been around for a while, obviously. And, a toy line that's been around a while and has obviously tried to reinvent itself. It went to the Pretenders, Action Masters and everything it did, redecoing stuff in Dayglow colors, whatever it did to survive. You get to a point where there's just nothing left to sell the buyer. You've sold him out, like there's nothing left to say that he's going to be excited about at this point. He knows what he's going to make off Transformers in a way. And Turtles has come on to the scene, and Batman's coming up, and, Power Rangers is going, and they get tired of buying the same stuff a little bit if there's nothing actually happening, no movies, no shows, that kind of stuff. So Hasbro's decision to go Beast Wars was actually the last gasp opportunity for the brand to be marketed at retail, essentially. They're like, you got to come back with something radically different or we're not interested. And that's why it's Beast Wars big with little Transformers.
Yeah, Transformers under it,
yeah, and that's probably why there isn't an Optimus Prime and a Prowl and a Bumblebee and all the classic names right away, Starscream, because they were trying to consciously prove that the brand as a play pattern had legs in other dimensions.
Interesting.
And that's why Beast Wars is so radically different from almost everything prior, and why they didn't really need to connect it to G1 at that time. Why they really weren't interested in that fan concept of how does this fit. They were like, whatever was old was bad. Whatever we're doing now is going to be different.
It was the 90s. The 90s.
It was the 90s.
90s was moving forward. Why do you look back?
Yeah.
And
I think that's important to go back and kind of, how did Beast Wars even happen a little bit? The brand was not in the best shape. The brand was not in a good spot. Yeah. Obviously some development moved to England and all this stuff. So
I did a segment on my podcast where I remember someone asked me what was the worst year in Transformer history, and I think it was 1992 I fell on, where it was like 1992, a total of 8 Transformer toys were sold worldwide, like new molds, no cartoon, no comic, no fiction, no nothing. And when you think about like what 1992 was at the time, that was like, Power Rangers was coming onto the scene. Ninja Turtles still had a little gas in the engine, and it was just not a good time
Star
for
Trek,
that.
the Next Generation.
Star. Yep, Playmates was doing the Star Trek toys too, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So that. And that thinking is how it ended up also in Cincinnati, right? We need new blood, we need a new attitude, new location. Like, we don't care what happened before. And toys, as you all know, can be very cutthroat that way. Oh yeah.
Once something is deemed yesterday's, thing, it is gone, and it's hard to move people off of it.
So exiting Energon, now we go into another subline. So let's talk about Alternators. So. How did that come about? Because that's the one that, as a mechanic personally, that was the one that really spoke to me as a line.
So this is a concept that is completely my own. I take slight credit for this concept, as hard as it was to come up with, I would admit. So what had happened is we were doing the reissues, and there were only so many of those. And obviously the Lamborghinis and the Jeeps and the trucks and the airplanes are going to do better than some of the more esoteric vehicle designs. So we started running out of some of the better molds that were, that had still tooling available in them, because these are old molds at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting too deep into it, Hasbro or Takara didn't really pay licensing on any of those Corvettes, Jeeps, Lamborghinis.
Oh yeah, back in the Diaclon days, they got away with it all.
Yeah, back in the day. Yeah, well, they got through the G1 days and into some of the reissue days, and then I had to deal with it not being those days anymore. So, I believe in a concept of if you can't fix it, feature it. And that is to say, if these old licensed cars are a problem, and in my opinion have limitations as far as how the toys were made back in the 70s in some cases, what would I do today to satisfy that need of having realistic cars in the Transformer line? And that's where we hit upon, Hasbro over the years, obviously as a toy company, has multiple deals with multiple toy companies over the long haul. So it's very easy for us us at that time to, call one of the car partners or car manufacturers or agents and say, hey, we're looking to do something, what kind of, are there any cars available or deals, available, or, they're trying to sell stuff too, so sometimes it's a synergy.
Yeah, it works out for them.
Yeah, so I will go back to I made a model. I bought a die-cast, I think it was a dark maroon or dark red crimson kind of Corvette. I think it was like a 1/48 scale, the bigger scale of car.
Mm-hmm. Well, because to give perspective, 1/64 is Hot Wheels, and then 1/48 would be, with the generic, larger, open the doors kind of car you could buy in Walmart. Yeah.
So I bought one of those, and then I bought a model kit of the same Corvette, and I put it on I think part of the Ultra Magnus RID body frame.
Really?
I sprayed the body frame gray or black. I put a head that looked appropriate for an Autobot. I don't remember what head I used. And then I glued the model kit parts in the same color as that die-cast car onto that frame. So it looked like I had a car and a robot. And that was my presentation model, right? And that's what I went in with. I go, hey, we want to do, at the time we called it Real Cars. That was the segment name, Real Cars. And the idea was, hey, let's work with car licensing partners so that we can get back to the hardest core traditions of our brand, and that's having these really realistic looking cars that turn into fantastic robots for our evolved fans, guys who don't want necessarily a projectile launcher, but really want something they could put on their desk or be proud to have in their man cave versus a little Armada toy. Was our thought process, right?
Well, and it really was kind of a return to the beginning of the brand, because it was just Alternators was just straight up transformations, no gimmicks, no nothing. And it was all licensed vehicles, which is what 84, 85 was for G1, which is what the G1er fans coveted and what they loved so much. So
now for Takara, it was a die-cast line.
Yes.
For
Vinyl
us,
Tech.
Was not a die-cast line. That would probably be the only featural difference between the two, is they really went with that prestige die-cast item that just didn't resonate with Hasbro.
Probably from a cost standpoint, I would imagine.
Yeah, cost and because you were going to get a lot more fish in our mind with the plastic version. That you'd be able to get, because of the price point, a wider swath of people that maybe aren't those die-hard collectors. If you went die-cast and had to charge that price, then you would only get that hardcore collector.
Well, if I remember correctly, original MSRP retail was $29.99 which I can only imagine probably would have been $39 if it was die-cast back then. So
yeah.
So
Alternators was pretty much made to fill that. We can't do licensed vehicles in these other segments. How do we honor that part of the brand? And it was probably part of our tactical effort to make the brand more prestigious. Again, on our way to trying to develop movies and things, we wanted more Hollywood-esque types of things to show.
Yeah. Armada was, Alternators was coming around 2004, 2005. You guys were probably in the early talks already with studios.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
So,
yeah, the studio talk stuff started early in the Energon era.
Okay, so yeah, 2004. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was actually working on it by 2005. So yeah.
So before we exit Alternators, I'd like to know. So how did you guys end up with, let's say, like Subaru first, or Dodge Viper? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Like to be the first ones.
Yeah, those were the best relationships we had.
Okay.
So
interesting. Subaru, really? That's interesting.
Well, through Takara.
Okay.
They had a license, I think, with their the
Tomica.
rally team.
I think Tomica, they had a line too of diecast.
Well, that's what it was. It was the Churro Qs and the.
Yeah, now it makes sense. Yeah.
I think Tomy has their own diecast line, right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they have their own kind of little Hot Wheels thing going with little boxes.
With the little red-ended boxes. Yeah. Which are nice cars. They are nice cars. So they had relationships with Subaru and that rally team particularly, I believe.
Yeah.
So that made that deal easy or straightforward.
Interesting.
Takara also likes to put their best foot forward in lines. If you kind of look, a lot of the time, so the Subaru, not only was it engineered really well, but it had more graphics on it than any other one did.
That smokes.
They like to jump in deep, and then we can't ever repeat it.
Well, that smoke screen specifically, that was based off of the World Rally Champion in 2005. So it was
absolutely.
There was a prestige with that too, with that car, where it's like, this deco that he has this was the champion of the World Rally competition at that time. So, pretty cool also.
Yeah, no, that was cool. So that's how those two, and we had a relationship with Dodge. Dodge was pretty cool. We had the ability to do anything in their entire catalog at any point in their company's history. It just didn't work out that we needed to do, a lot of Dodge vehicles.
Well, I think again, when you're doing something with Japan, how many American cars are going to resonate on that side of the ocean? Exactly.
That was a big issue, and I think if you start to look at some of the decisions we made, the Honda S2000 or whatever, some of those cars, they're just cars. They're not even the Lancer.
S2000 in Japan does have its car culture, but in America, no, it's not. It has nothing over here. Let me just turn my head.
The pickup truck, wasn't a big deal for them. The Optimus.
Yeah.
But because we made it Optimus, they could sell it in their market. If we made that any other character, it would have been a problem for them.
Yeah, I'm looking over same thing. Which was called the Honda. I think it was called RSX in Japan, which was called the Acura RSX in America.
Yep.
Yep. Just trying to. I'm looking at my collection right now. Yeah, there was a lot of the one that was Mirage, the Ford GT. That one especially. That one must have been. That's an interesting choice. That one too, which later became Hot Rod for San Diego Comic-Con. Yeah, that was a weird choice too.
Yeah, well, some of those companies came to us, and obviously they were promoting that color scheme and that reissue of that car that year. So sometimes they would come to us and they just wanted more action happening, So that's how we ended up with some of those cars.
So at the end of this,
so it was interesting. And then, but for our alternators, one of the things that was a disappointment, it was always stuck in that price point.
Yeah.
We had explored motorcycles and sea-doos and jet skis.
That I didn't know. And interesting.
And snow machines, and we looked at all kinds of cool things to offer bigger or smaller versions of realistic things, and price points and the volume and the play just never fit for what the deals. I've said this in other places, I'll make it brief here, but when you're the alternators, every item is a separate deal with a separate company that has a separate licensing agreement, length of agreement, payment method, oversight, expectation, reference. Either they have good reference or they don't. maybe they're fast or slow. So every Alternators item was like its own little company that you had to follow and maintain, and it was a real. I mean, that made it one of the most difficult things to work on, because we had to track all that, all the revenue those companies were owed, and each one was very different. It just makes it like more work than you want to outlay in a way. I know that sounds a little weird.
Oh no, it makes sense, because each one of them you have to kind of deal with. I mean, I could only imagine in terms of also.
It was Greg Lombardo. Greg Lombardo had the lead marketer during a large part of my time on Transformers. Great guy. He was the one that had to make sure all those nickels got paid to those guys based on how many we produced and sold and all those individual deals. And that was not fun work,
I can imagine. So coming to the end of 2004, so now Alternators is winding down, and we have a anniversary product that's being planned that would shift that's, in my opinion, it's the longest running Transformer sub brand to this day. Talk to me about how Masterpiece started here with this what was called at the time 20th anniversary Optimus Prime.
Yeah, I still can't call it anything but that. It's ingrained in me, so I always reference it to that. But that was a weird one. Again, we had set out on this course to bring the brand back, make it relevant again, make it cool again. We wanted to celebrate its kind of heritage and iconic characters. Things kept going better and better. And I think we were either tasked with looking at some new types of products or something. But the story I tell is I blew up a Dreamwave cover. There was a cover of Optimus kind of running with roller behind him in the desert. I blew that up to the scale I wanted to make the product, and then I blew up a G1 Optimus to that same scale. And you could really see real quick how technically bad the body of G1 Optimus looks compared to how they're drawn in modern comic book vernacular. So basically my pitch was, let's do a 12-inch Transformer that looks more like the classic Optimus in a modern sense, and cooler, basically coolest Optimus we can get. So that was my goal, okay? That was the main goal. I sat down, I was across from Brian Goldner, I put the board up. He didn't even let me talk. He looked at the board, he goes, so what do you want to do here? You want to make a classic Optimus, but like a prestige one? I'm like, yeah, I do. He goes, all right. And then he told me the price that I had to spend on the product, and it is the highest price I ever had on product to spend. And he usually the heads of the companies and marketers, they like, well, we don't want this to go over $30. This was a unique toy where it's like, okay, this toy needs to be $50. What can you put into it to make it worth that? Which was really cool, because I otherwise never would have got to do rubber tires, VM, the light up matrix,
if I remember correctly,
the moving mouth,
the final,
clear windows, the whole
final price for it was $69.99 at Toys R Us. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
and that was it was hefty, but it had weight to it. We got back to die cast for the first time in a while on a newer product anyway, for a classic guy. So it was just, again, right place, right time, and kind of like it was time to do the best Optimus we could do at that time. Every generation needs that. And I was fortunate that I got a lot of money to be able to make the bells and whistles on that one that I did. And that one stood apart from a lot of toys for a long time, which was cool. And what we're skirting around is that was the first Masterpiece then.
Yeah, and that opened up the floodgates for that. Yeah.
A modern scale, a modern expectation of detail and transformation function. I think it opened up the eyes of any dreamy robot designer out there that has the gumption to get up and make their own robots. So it has its place for sure. I'm proud of that one. Definitely proud of that one.
Yeah, it was something that when it came around, it set like a standard at that point and a price point for Transformer fans where it's like, well, when am I going to get my Masterpiece Megatron? When am I going to get my Masterpiece this? Although at the time it was only called Masterpiece because of the Japanese side of it. Japan called it Masterpiece. Here it was 20th anniversary Optimus Prime, as it was called. Very little differences between the two, just mostly aesthetic differences.
So for us, obviously,
and safety measures.
We tend to want to have something to celebrate. So as the buyer, like, here's the reason you want to put this on your shelf. It's the 20th anniversary. Remember all that revenue you did over the years? We're going to celebrate that. We're going to make some more. It's very business oriented with those names.
So after that, I mean, we could keep going into Masterpiece, but that's a loaded one that could be saved for the future. But we go into Cybertron. So
well, if you remember, there's kind of a big gap with Masterpiece. So I did the Optimus, and then we did the Redeco.
Ultra Magnus.
Takara started doing trailers and things, and I had very little to do with the Starscream or whoever was next. That's when basically it gave Kobayashi-san, reason to go do what he does best, basically. And I like to say I launched that line, but those guys deserve all the credit for where it's gone.
Oh yeah, and again, that's something I think we'll probably revisit in the future, because it's still, to this day, it's the longest lasting subline of Transformers, because it's still around today, almost 20 years later, where everything else rotates, 3-year come and gone. It's just how it is. And yet that line still is around today, where even Alternators is not around anymore. Alternators also had a pretty long run. But so now we go into 2005, 2006, and we have Galaxy Force, aka Cybertron. And so how did we get to this just before we go into the movieverse?
Yeah, so again, we're still co-developing. So there was going to be 52 episodes. We started to recognize that how the calendar worked with these episodes, like with the Unicron drop at the second Christmas kind of thing. This one was a little trickier to come up with what that overall feature was going to be. We didn't have as much development time. The team, obviously, what you've highlighted, we kept doing more and more products. So the time that Eric and I and then some other guys who came in onto the team, we had less and less time and more products. So it was harder to develop Cybertron from those breadboard models, those conceptual models, making images to sell people on. There just wasn't as much time. So I think some people know the story of Supercross, some people don't. The original pitch, the idea was going to be that something was happened on Earth that was causing some holes in the universe, or something needed to be repaired. We were still trying to figure these things out. Because again, I wasn't a writer, and what my job was not to write, but my job was to set the table enough that we knew what we needed to kind of talk to people about. We didn't need people coming in going, here, I got an idea for Transformers. No. We got a whole product line. We have an idea. We need it to be fleshed out and developed and thought through and, made better, essentially. But our goal is this. So our idea initially was, and this is coming from, again, going to a lot of bot cons and other cons and hearing from fans more and more. And I think our mindset started to get into more of a fanboy mentality, which maybe we can get deeper into some other day. But my initial idea was kind of going across the universes to all the different eras of Transformers and basically, I'll use the word abducting them out of their time and place to form this super group to defeat Unicron. Okay, so it was going to be like G1 Jazz with a Beast Wars Rhinox with, somebody else.
I can see
from
Armada.
Now
I can see how it evolved to the final product, but okay, continue.
Yeah, so that's why it was Supercross. It was a super crossover of every G1 or every era of Transformers that would somehow look to combine the universes, or not, certainly not rectify any kind of canon by any means, but at least acknowledge, that there had been all these eras. And that was the idea, so that they would go around and find these guys that would be the ultimate ways that you'd bring them back and defeat Unicron. Well, that was a step too far for management. They're like, you guys are really being a little fan-oriented here. These aren't characters that kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds know. You don't really have a feature play. It's just a little more of the same. And they were not wrong. So that's where you get the Taco Bell napkin of revelation, where you kind of take that core concept of going out and getting these superstars and coming back to going out and exploring alternate planets within that have been seeded with Cybertronian life, and we need to harness all these lost colonies to defeat Unicron.
And not to mention,
which was more of a sellable thing, the beast planet, the giant planet, the fire planet. It very much was what that discussion was about. We need something to hook, and then the cyber keys kind of was the gimmick to make that happen, and Vector Prime and Primus and all that stuff.
The new collectible thing too, and in a lot of ways, the cyber keys were just pretty much a simplified version of what the Minicons were. It was doing kind of doing the same thing.
Yep. And again, that's where I say when you don't have as much development time, or you've already thrown a lot of stuff at the wall, you end up maybe sometimes or you've already been.
So then, within Cybertron, so you have, I guess, like you mentioned, your big Christmas item was initially that big Starscream. How did Primus come along afterwards? What was the planning with that one?
I think same deal. I think they wanted a big character. We had the big giant character from the giant planet. I don't recall how the book decided too much. I do know that this is where we start overlaying with the development of the movie and or pitching the movie to Hollywood. And one of the books that we had as part of our arsenal that we would drop off with everybody that we met was that DK Transformers guidebook.
I'm reaching for it right now. Okay, for people.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And Don Figueroa had an awesome image of. I'm
gonna go to that page. In that book. Continue talking. I'll just go to the page for people who are listening.
And so this book, this book was on, constantly around, and so that image stood out. And I think, when you're trying to figure out what characters you should do, that character popped up and stood out, and that's how I think he got chosen. But a big part of it was that image in that book. And if you look at the design of Primus, it's definitely Don's design.
Oh yeah, Don Figueroa was. Especially, I would imagine, because Don also had a lot to do with titaniums and stuff, the titaniums line. So,
yep, yeah, he was a preferred guy, because he, in his background, for those of you that may or may not know, Don Figueroa, great Transformer artist, but he's also a model builder back in his early days. So he's one of the few artists that I always could trust that he kind of was trying to figure out how they would move and transform. So we could use him to not just be a pretty picture kind of person, but like have some extra thought towards the transformer aspects of the product or the characters. So he worked on 20th anniversary Optimus too. He veneered that.
Oh, did he? Okay, didn't know that.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Just showing the viewers here, just the Primus we're talking about from the book. Yeah, that book. Yeah. It's funny. That book for the longest time was a big reference book for a lot of fans. Now we have all kinds of guidebooks and stuff, but back in the day, that was a go-to.
That was
for
a good
lot
overview.
Of people. Yeah.
I gave away dozens of those books.
Okay, so now we leave. Oh, unless you have something else to say about Cybertron. Sorry.
No, where was I? I was going to go into that. Well, we were developing the movie at the same time.
Yeah.
But I don't remember. So that it was probably all in that same suit. Yeah, that's what it. Again, knowing he wouldn't be in the movies.
initially. Who knows
Yeah.
what the future will bring. So then let's talk now. So we're leaving Cybertron, and now we begin, which I feel is the biggest turning point for the brand, which was going mainstream in a lot of ways on a whole other level with the Michael Bay movies. So how did those conversations, like we touched on it a little bit when we were having this conversation, but when did this really start? When did those first early conversations start?
Sometime in, I want to say it could be as early as 03, but maybe 04. So the sequence of events is this. There were 3 producing partners that bid Hasbro for the rights to pitch Hollywood the brand. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we read 3 different kind of one-pitch takes, kind of like, hey, we're going to go to all these offices and try to pitch this as a major motion picture, live action, blah, blah, blah. Here's our take.
Okay, hold on a second. I just want to jump in. So Paramount wasn't like the first one. Okay. No, okay. No. Just I never knew the relationship that Paramount had with Hasbro before. Okay.
So these are independent producers.
Okay.
That we were talking to at that time. I don't recall what our position was with Paramount overall. Okay. I don't think we did a lot of Paramount products. We never did Star Trek or any of that stuff. So is Planet of the Apes Paramount? I don't think it is.
No, that's why I'm trying to think too.
That's Fox. That's Fox. So I worked with a lot of people prior, but I never worked with Paramount.
Did you guys have Dungeons and Dragons at that point? Because they did a movie that did terrible.
We did, but again, the Kenner Boys Toys side of it never touched anything, so I wouldn't have known much about it. So, so these producing partners, made their pitches, what they thought they wanted to do, what their credentials were, so on and so forth. And we picked one of them, and that was the team of Tom DeSanto and Don Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
So they went around, my understanding is they went around and talked to all the studios and various producing companies to, see who, if anybody would be interested in a live action Transformers movie. And that took a long time. I would say most of the major people they talked to just didn't see it, didn't understand it, saw it more like Toy Story, didn't understand how robots could talk to humans and how that could be a compelling, big budget movie. Just a lot of weird perceptions of Hollywood, not connected to the brand or even what we were trying to do. Just big robot movie has never been successful. A toy movie on this scale has never been successful. You guys see He-Man? Just all these kind of built up things that lived within their decision processes were there.
And rightfully so, because like you said,
not wrong. I mean,
it was a different time.
Robo Jocks was the previous best.
It's Robo Jocks. What's his name there, right? from Karate Kid?
That was the next best
Ken whatever there
prior to this one.
But totally agree. Well, and from their perspective, look, the video game movies weren't doing well. All of those would bomb, with the exception of Mortal Kombat. You mentioned before He-Man. I really, when you think about it, outside of that He-Man movie with Dolph Lundgren, what other major 80s toy brand had a live-action adaptation? Let alone anything
Turtles, but I don't even know if you can connect that.
Yeah,
in the same way.
That was I think that was Golden Harvest. That was Golden Harvest. That was an independent studio that struck gold. They were very lucky.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Where was I with that?
Oh, sorry, going back to like shopping it around, but
yeah, so they're just shopping it around, and it's actually, to be honest, not going well. Most nobody sees the potential, the vision. CG action characters, have only been around for a few years at this point. Mm-hmm. We still got a lot of residue with Jar Jar in the back of our minds out there in Hollywood. So there just was a lot of, again, we'd set up the idea that Transformers was cool and the Autobot and Decepticon icons were cool, and that there was momentum and that there was still a fan base, but yet, some of the other doors and other decisions on the Hollywood side still didn't fit. But they kept trying, and ultimately at some point Spielberg got involved because he did know the property. And
so I just want to jump in there.
He kind of yeah.
There was rumors for years. It was, I want to say it was 2003 or 2004. Tom Hanks was on the Jay Leno show. And Tom Hanks was talking about sitting down with his kids and watching cartoons. And Jay Leno says to him, like, oh, what cartoons did you enjoy watching when you were a kid? And he said, oh, there was a cartoon that I used to love watching as an adult. And he said when he was filming the movie Big, he was I was obsessed with this show. I don't know if anyone in the audience know it. It's called The Transformers. And, like the theme song could have been sung by Sinatra, Transformers, robots. And everyone in the audience went nuts. And, of course, Jay Leno has no idea what he's talking about. But I think that something there, and, Tom Hanks' relationship with Steven Spielberg, I think there was something there. Yeah,
those things matter. There's zeitgeist and stuff. People feel the buzz out there. And Spielberg is obviously one of the best barometers of that. Mm-hmm. So he came on board and kind of took, obviously, that's how it works in Hollywood. The bigger fish kind of takes over the projects a little bit. So Don and Tom kind of became part of the producing team. Spielberg came in. We pitched him a few times. That's when Lorenzo was also already with Hasbro and involved. He was at Paramount. Maybe that's how it ended up at Paramount. And forgetting something. So we started getting some potential buzz. There was a meeting. I remember there was a meeting with Spielberg, and it went pretty well out in L.A., and all the head folks and Paramount and things, and it was really decent. But there was no director attached yet. There was a rough kind of what they call a treatment script. Mm-hmm. Like they do these crazy scripts out there where it lets everybody feel comfortable that the thing that they're actually going to do is possible, even though everyone knows the script isn't ever going to get made. It's really weird because people get paid a lot of money to make these scripts.
Oh yeah, those drafts like crazy.
So we this guy pitched a whole concept and had all kinds of crazy ideas and thoughts, but it really did at least put you in the imagination of what a Transformer movie could be. And then that's when Spielberg came in, and he had just worked with Bob and Alex on Zorro and some other stuff. He had worked with Michael Bay on The Island and stuff like that. And Paramount had worked with Michael Bay on The Island. So it was like all these people kind of came together to be part of this project. One of the meetings I talk about sometimes is this secret meeting we had on a Saturday morning in Rhode Island where Michael Bay, the head of Paramount, the writers, Don Murphy, Tom DeSanto, some of the board members of Paramount, some of the board members of Hasbro, for that matter, came to a meeting where me and Michelle Field had to basically pitch the brand to Michael Bay. And it was like the full court press of the basics. So in different videos and things around movie 1 and 2 that he talks about Transformers School or Transformers 101 or going to Transformers Boot Camp, that's what this was. Basically, we were explaining to him as if he had never seen it before, because he probably hadn't, that these are robotic entities that have personality and souls, digital souls. They're not made in factories, or there's not a mad scientist manufacturing these things. It's an AI. They don't morph. They don't transmutate. They convert. They got a body mass. They're an alien that has the ability to mimic. All these things that we had to explain to them and why they would want to come here. And there's a philosophy battle between the hero and the villain. So we explained all that kind of stuff and the major characters. We explained the different eras that we've done, beasts and Dinobots and all this kind of thing. We had some footage that we had done as test animation at different times. It was more realistic looking, and that really sparked his interests. Seeing how it could look in a real world environment with real lighting helped him, not because Hollywood directors don't understand comic illustrations and stuff at all. They don't. It doesn't. That's not how stuff looks like in the camera. So they don't even know how to. They almost don't even know how to look at it. It's like a sketch. Everything that we'd ever have to do, we'd have to render in like heavy 3D, just so they would look at it.
Through a camera lens, almost to envision it.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we got better at camera positioning and kind of more inspirational story images to really sell a moment versus trying to just say, hey, here's a cool robot. They don't give a shit about a cool robot. They want a moment. They want it to be impactful.
Something for the trailer. Which is what they do. Yeah.
All that stuff. Yeah. So we did the robot school, and that went well, and Michael Bay signed on not soon after that, and that was probably in the summer of 2005, I guess. Yeah. In the fall of 2005, I was in the art studio working with the art department and having weekly meetings with Bay and the art director, and going back and forth. Once reference was finished and approved and signed off to go to Takara with it, and they were all conceptual sketches. ILM hadn't started much of what they were doing yet. So they were all kind of in-house digital renders. So that was that back end of that year. Was 2005, was kind of working on the actual pre-development of the film. Then they started filming sometime in February, March of the next year, and I was working with Takara to get all that stuff done.
How much of would you say, because it's like the chicken or the egg, how much would you say was designs came first and then they really had to figure out to make toys from these designs? Or were the toy guys also kind of influencing how those designs would be done because they had to become toys? Like, which do you think came first? Because I know, like, it's been known for years, like the 86 Transformers movie, Flair O'Deary, who was the designer for the new stuff, he did the designs afterwards, and Takara had to look at it and go, okay, how do we make this a reality? So how much of that was that there for?
So we were conscious. We were certainly
because these were complex designs that we'd be getting. So
yeah, exactly. So we were definitely concerned that there's no way we were going to be able to do what they intended to do.
Yeah.
So we knew that from day one, right? So what we for a while we had the concept of like first movement. So like we thought that the transformation that they were going to create, I don't know why we thought this, it's how we do it, so we didn't overthink it, that they would do one transformation and that it would be repeated in every scene. Well, if you watch the movie, it changes every time, right? Mm-hmm. So initially we thought there would be the first movement. So like there's that silhouette of Bumblebee on the hill when he transforms in the first film.
Yeah.
He kind of cracks at the hood and the windshield line. We wanted to repeat that first movement, and that was a big deal in the first film or the first wave of product. And then we soon realized that was probably just extra effort that wasn't needed. We had given them all the books and a lot of models to look at to see how our toys move and the types of how you tuck hands into forearms and feet into the backs of trucks and cars, and kind of how it all works. You can hide the head behind windshields, and when it opens up, the chest is the front of the car and the head can now be exposed and all that. So they took all that to heart. And so while we weren't designing the toys for them to then make in CG, they weren't also randomly just making crazy CG that we had to totally figure it out. There was a little bit of even though we knew it was never going to be 100%, there was an effort to work together to make it as best we could.
Yeah, so something impossible wouldn't happen.
Which is very different than the Flair O'Deary thing, which is
again, and that's the primary reason. It was a lot more also, I guess.
That's not on him.
No, of course, but you know what? Also, it was a lot more forgiving back then. I mean, that's probably the primary reason why still to this day, the Masterpiece line is so coveted, and even the Generations line, because back then it was okay to have, this is what Wheelie's toy is from Flair O'Deary's design, and this is what the toy was that Hasbro gave us, vastly different in design, but we just kind of accepted it back then. It was just fine. It's like, this is how the toy looks. This is how this is how it looks on the show. You know, look, even the original Generation 1 Optimus Prime had yellow eyes, and the show he had blue eyes. No one complained back then. So, where today it's like every little thing has to kind of be screen accurate. But I was always kind of curious about that, because at least in the case of, you know, the old Generation 1 designs, there still was a blocky simplicity to this, where, I mean, you look at any scene from the 2007 Michael Bay movie, and there's like internal gears, and, you know, stuff is tucking in an organic way.
We you know, I think I'll touch on it when we get to animated, but, you know, one of the things that I feel like I enjoyed and excelled in was finding new play patterns and stuff for each iteration, each segment, and new ways to present the toys. And that movie design, where every little interior side of the chest, or inside the shoulder socket, or underneath the forearm, you know, you could put detail that made it look even cooler, or more advanced, or more technical than it really was in the toy. That was a new visual language for us, and we always enjoyed any time we could do that, because the goal isn't to make the same toy over and over and over and over. So the visual difference really helps, and that was fun. The movie was fun for that reason.
It was a way to make a new Rubik's Cube every time.
Yes, yeah. You know, since we're talking movies, I'm bummed out that there wasn't more color variety in the actual films and characters. I'm a little bummed out. You know, certainly we didn't have say over, you know, how characters were personified in every case, or made to live on screen. So that, you know, some of that's a little fuzzy and not as fun as fans we would have wanted. But the experience was good. You know, made a lot of money. It's certainly a touchstone.
It served its
movie.
I always say, like, you know, I always tell this to fans, like, the opinion of the movie is fine. Like, your opinion is valid. A lot, like, even me, I don't think they're the greatest movies in the world, but the purpose that they served was the most important thing, which was, regardless if you liked those movies or not, or how much screen time the Autobots had for talking or something, but it brought Transformers to a mainstream audience. It brought it to an audience that really wasn't paying attention up to this point. I mean, it's not like Transformers up to that point was an absent brand. It was always on TV, there was comic books, there was always in the toy aisles, but it wasn't in the movie theater. So that transition really... Yeah. You were going to say, sorry?
Yeah, no, well, they used to talk about this a lot more. I think Hollywood obviously has changed given the modern entertainment landscape, but they used to go for this idea of quadrants, right? You can have old, you can have young, you can have male, or you could have female, right? And different movies went in different directions. Now, the summer blockbusters, ideally, is a 4-quadrant movie. And Transformers did achieve that. Grandmothers all of a sudden knew the term Transformers.
Yep.
You know, moms, you know, there were date nights with 17-year-old girls that went to see Transformers with their boyfriends. Well, you know, that did not happen in our era. Right?
Well, that's what it was more than anything.
It definitely opened it up to, you know, and again, then that girl, if she wanted to, she could go down to a high-end fashion boutique and get a cool Autobot logo T-shirt, you know, if she wanted to.
Exactly.
And it changed the perception of the value of the brand, the meaning of the brand. It wasn't just that weird toy line that sometimes is, you know, crazy colors. It was the toys became just one expression of a much bigger thing.
It's that evolution where you want to go from just being, oh, it's a toy brand or it's a comic brand, and you want it to evolve into what I call a lifestyle brand, where all of a sudden now it's instead of just you buy Transformer toys and you watch the cartoon, you have a Transformer beach towel while you have your Transformer cereal, while you're wearing your Transformer t-shirt with your Transformer branded shoes. You collect Transformer toys while you're watching Transformer cartoons, but you go to see them in the theaters too. And you want to create that lifestyle brand, which up to that point really was dominated by Star Wars. Star Wars was like the only brand that I could have really thought of. Maybe Star Trek to a mild extent, but mostly Star Wars was that brand that just totally ate all that up. One moment. Hope we're not losing you there.
I throw Batman in there, but
yeah, Batman too. Yeah, Batman's another one. And it's just I've always felt that, like you were saying before about bringing the girlfriend. I used to always say that when I used to live with my family, my barometer for what I felt was when something would be mainstream is you'll take something like, let's say, the X-Men. It's a cartoon, it's a comic. Parents would never read a comic, they would never watch a cartoon. But now there's a live action movie with Hugh Jackman. Now for some reason that's okay to consume. Like there was that, today it's a different world today, but back then there was a stigma where it's like, why would I read a comic book that's for children? Why would I watch a cartoon that's for children? But yet somehow if you took that same story and you put it on the big screen, all of a sudden it became socially acceptable to consume it that way. And Transformers needed that same thing too. Even though it wasn't apples to apples in terms of the story, we weren't taking the Generation 1 story or Simon Furman's comics from Marvel and putting them to the big screen, but we were taking the concept and putting it on the big screen. And then all of a sudden, now it was crazy because for me especially, where I lived that brand, especially during that time, and having people around me that never collected toys, never even bought toys. And then they see this movie, and the next thing they know, they're looking at that, I'll call it the legend scale, the small ones, and going, you know what, I think I'm going to pick that up. Just because I really liked the movie and that Megatron character was kind of cool stuck in the ice. And it blew my mind how people that were not Transformer collectors, that weren't even toy collectors, and I felt like it began the beginning of that. And 2007 really was a turning point in a lot of ways because the iPhone came out. iPhone came out, like, mobile devices, nerds could be on the go, but also, geek culture, which used to be sitting at a computer screen desktop, was now in your hand.
Yep.
There was this huge turning point, and the 2007 movie came out. Oddly enough, Big Bang Theory came out around that same time too. People could debate if that's a good or bad thing. But it really brought...
those first two...
You were going to say, sorry?
No, I also think of those first two commercials for the movie.
Not the
teaser commercial.
Well,
those first two were like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, there was something there that intrigued an entire audience that were not... to me, I feel that along with the Marvel Cinematic Universe created geek became chic. And I really, again, you could say whatever you want about the Michael Bay movies, but I felt that it just had opened up a mainstream doorway to people who would have never, back in the day, would have been caught dead holding a Transformer toy in public. And then all of a sudden, like you look today with pop vinyls and everything, it's like how do you not be a geek and be proud, regardless of any social background you came from? And it was so fascinating to see that, and it really did start with the 2007 movie, because there was just something there. And I've always felt Transformers always had a little bit of a hip-hop culture edge, which was always accepted by hip-hop culture. This was like we're talking like the 90s. Like you'd have Method Man and Wu-Tang, they'd say Optimus Prime in a lyric, or they say transform like the Decepticons. There was always that kind of thing going on, but it's like the Michael Bay movie just opened it up to every, like you said before, the quadrants, or as I would use, the demographics. All those demos all of a sudden converged and said, hey, like, Transformers is cool. Like, you're saying.
It was a rocket ship.
Now you could go to Walmart, where it used to be back in 2000, 2001, 2002, you wanted a Transformer t-shirt, you had to go to Hot Topic. Because Hot Topic was that alternative clothing store for nostalgic or like alternative brands, I like to say. It's like, hey, remember Transformers, that 80s property? So where now you go to Walmart in 2007, you could buy a Transformer hat, a Decepticon logo, and before you know it, you're driving around, you're seeing Decepticon and Autobot logos on cars. Doesn't mean they're a hardcore fan. Just means that they somehow identified now with this brand. and it was incredible to see that change that was happening. But either way, like it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy to see that transition that was going on. No pun intended.
Yeah, I don't. You know, I can't imagine being part of a crazier, bigger kind of, I mean, cultural event.
Yeah,
you know,
it was,
than that for sure. It was something. Yeah.
So what we're gonna do, because we have so much meat left on the bone, but we all have like a ton of questions, and we're already coming at like the 9 o'clock mark. So I figured people were just throwing questions, and I apologize for the listeners. I was kind of like ignoring them. So we'll jump into some questions. Obviously, the super chat stuff will get priority here. So one question was asked: what dormant Hasbro property has best chance of revival today, in your opinion? For like a cinematic universe, let's say. Like, what would you think? This is asked by Drew Torres. Thanks for the super chat, Drew. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. I would think one of.
Kind of lost you there. Hold on a sec.
More about what?
Say it again. Sorry, we lost it. We had a poor connection for a second. There we go.
The Dritz series, the Forgotten Realms.
Oh, really?
Dungeons and Dragons, the Dark Elf. I think that one could be something. But was the question more what toy lines? Probably.
Well, they're saying like a dormant Hasbro property that you think would have the best chance for revival. So, like, to give an example, Kenner's, which now I think, you know, like Mask, let's say, from Kenner, which became Hasbro afterwards.
Well, I tried a lot of ways to do some of that. So maybe my mentality is it's a little inside baseball. But I always thought that Mask is the middle point between G.I. Joe and Transformers, right?
I agree.
I always liked the idea of Matt Tracker being the test pilot for the G.I. Joe technology, and that at some point along the way he got a cog of transformation to start playing with, and that's how Mask became Mask. So I think there's some cool stuff there, but it's derivative. You know, if you got Transformers, do you need more transforming vehicles? Maybe not. If you got soldier guys, do you need guys that drive around in cool cars and fire guns? I don't know.
And as much as Mask is a brand that's remembered by, like, you know, 80s heads and stuff, it's something it's not a big brand. Like, you know, it's much more niche, in my opinion, where it's something that I feel like if you had to revive Mask, you'd really have to integrate it into something else that's already, like you mentioned, like G.I. Joe, to give it a leg up. Because like they've tried, IDW Comics tried a Mask comic book, it really didn't find legs. They once in a while, you know, they throw out a Mask toy here and there, or they make a Matt Tracker toy, and it's not like it sells like gangbusters or something. And I love Mask as a series, but it's more my nostalgia to it. But to accept from a mainstream audience, people don't really remember it. It's the same problem I've always said with Thundercats. Is like only so many.
I agree.
Only so, like, people remember that logo. That's
Micronauts too.
Yeah. Micronauts. You know what Hasbro's trying with that? I'm curious to see where they're going to go, but that's going to be another tough one for them, I think, because there's not a built-in audience that has been sitting around for years going, "Where's my Micronauts?" And the problem with that brand is because the fiction of it was so heavily tied to Marvel, who is not going to obviously give up, you know, those pieces of it. That's the big problem too that exists. Is there's
aspects,
there's aspects of it that Marvel owns that they're not going to give up. And as a result of that,
the biggest. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, as a result of that, it's already niche, and then the niche within the niche is too much of a headache to get back, to the point that you just got to really just build from the ground up all over again. And then you say to yourself, is that even, like, if you would have called it any other name, is it going to make a difference? You know, sometimes using that title or that IP is important, but how many people, honestly, I could probably go up to a ton of guys who are 80s kids like me and go, hey, remember Micronauts? And they'll be like, well, you mean Micro Machines? You know, like they probably wouldn't even remember it. Because it was so niche.
My deeper personal opinion, I guess, would be, you know, it's basically He-Man. It's the last hole to be filled in the 80s, reissue nostalgia, big budget, some sort of movie kind of opportunity. Any other toy line along the way, really, either, to your point, is there's not enough there.
Well, the thing is,
or no one remembers and just do something new. Who cares if you want to bring back Megaforce.
Megaforce.
Who cares?
People talk about in humanoids. They talk about visionaries. They talk about all these obscure brands. But the crazy
Visionaries could be cool because it has a built-in play pattern-ish kind of gimmick.
But
that
the
at
one
least
thing
gets people.
The one thing with Visionaries, though, is that if Hasbro decided to go in that mystical route, there's already Hasbro that owns Wizards of the Coast, and them touching Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. So I feel they almost don't want to even build that up too much because they have these other much bigger money-making properties that they own that they rather... if they're going to make a high fantasy movie franchise, I think they're going to go with Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons over Visionaries.
Oh yeah.
And Visionaries, I mean, what was their gimmick? Holograms.
Well, even to bring G.I. Joe to relevancy is a little.
It's to me, like you mentioned before, like with He-Man, it's like you have to look at.
Not easily.
Well, I was gonna say, like, what is the mega successful stuff from the '80s? And it really was He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers. And then when you start getting closer to the late 80s, then Ninja Turtles pops its head out, no pun intended, in like 1988, 1989. Otherwise, everything else was kind of just sharing shelf space and limited success, like Thundercats, like trying to think of some others. Again, like there really isn't. Everything else is really a small niche toy line that found, minimal success here or there. Bad connection again. What was I going to say? So hold on, we have another question. We have a question here from Scott Green. He asked, how many unreleased figure concepts have you designed?
Well, it depends on what you consider unreleased. I got tons of sketches, obviously, along the way of things that you just go a different way. There are a few models here and there, I guess. But what I like to tell people is the Hasbro Takara deal was such that once we hit upon an idea and we started development to a certain level, and these are complex and budgeted items, models are needed and everything else, engineering is needed. So we had a deal where we kind of shared the development costs, but if Hasbro were to cancel an item or decide we no longer need an item, we would pay for the full development price. So it behooved us to make good decisions and not abandon any models or tools because the price of that was almost more than to continue it. To get to
that point, yeah, of course.
We had to make everything. Yeah. So once we got to a certain point, we pretty much did make everything, and then there's the few examples of the animated models,
or like Unicron or something, the original.
Yeah, here and there, but those are far and few between, to be honest.
And a lot of those, with the exception of Unicron, but even Unicron, you could argue it's more at the end of the brand, so it's kind of like, yeah, we tooled it, but the brand's already on its way out. At least in the case of like animated. So we have the question here.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No problem. What was the best toy line during your run? Let's see if we still got you there. Did you hear me? I think we're a little delayed. Let me know when you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So next question is, what was the best toy line during your run?
Of my own. Why am I losing you all of a sudden?
I don't know. Connection's getting a little weak.
Yeah. I'll try something else. All right. So you are there?
Yes.
Okay, so do you think it's the toy line that I did, or
Well, it says here, what is the best toy line during your
industry?
run?
I don't know. Probably animated.
Probably. A lot of people would agree with you on that one. Animated was pretty good.
And I say that, I mean, my part on that was the development of why we would do something like that and how do we make it a reality. Eric and Derek get all the credit for making those actual products fit so well. But what I like about why I would say it's the best, it's the most integrated, thoughtful, connected development process from the three elements, the two toy companies and the entertainment, to achieve, as close to realistic looks as you possibly could. So I think that's the most successful.
Nick asks here, do you have a Transformer collection, or do you just design stuff back in the day?
I have my original G1 Transformer, Optimus Prime, from when I was a kid, missing the arms and all scratched up chrome, and Autobot sticker on his window chest, because I thought logos went on the chests, not the side of arms back then. And I'm an American superhero kid. But no, I'm a collector of interesting toys and objects and art. But I wouldn't say I was a super Transformer collector before or after. But I do like robots, and I like transforming robots, so they're in there.
Awesome.
But I'm being a creator type person. I'm influenced by so many different things. I kind of go all over the place with what I'm into versus deep into any one thing.
Totally cool. One person asks here, why is there such a massive difference in terms of the designs of Robots in Disguise in 2001 to Armada? That's pretty. I think we kind of covered that one.
Pretty. Yeah. The Japanese had a lot of time to do.
Yeah, that's
fancy toys that are very complex, which is fine. I was making kid-focused toys that didn't need that subtlety.
Yeah.
For Armada.
Let's see, what do we got here? What's your opinion on the discontinuing year-old Transformers? Do you think it's right to keep in... What are they trying to say here? Do you think it's right to, in mind of keeping... Oh, okay, I see what he's trying to say here. Pretty much what he's trying to say, what is your opinion of when they discontinue old Transformers, making it difficult for poorer collectors to afford newer figures and release? I think it's referring to reissues. I'll cover that one. It's just moving forward with brands. I mean, you can't put the same product on the shelf over and over until someone could afford it. So that's a tough one. Let's see, what do we got here? We have questions here that are not related to you, Mr. Archer. We have, what do you think the Transformers War for Cybertron Netflix Ultra Magnus is supposed to be an SDCC or NYCC exclusive with how the box looked? No, I think that Walmart wanted something special for their shelving now that they're the big fish without Toys R Us around. Let's see what else we got here. More questions that are not related. Unfortunately, this always comes up. Guys, we'll save that for another time to talk about modern product. Me and Josdy might return tomorrow to do another stream. And we'll tackle all the questions in relation to modern product.
Yeah, I do tell people, I pay attention to kind of what's happening, but I lived so much Transformers during those 13 plus years that I kind of let the guys do whatever they do now, and I don't pay any attention. So I'm not too good on any of the modern stuff for me.
Well, what we'll do next time, definitely we'll try to tackle like a second half pretty much. So here we have a question here by Common Pikachu. He asks, why did you leave Hasbro, Mr. Archer? Like, what was the situation? I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I had gotten into the IP side of things, working on those other developments and things. That took me a little bit away from the toy development side. which probably in the end was probably unfortunate because some roles that I could have fit into went to other people. And then when they started the studio, I didn't have a good seat as much as I thought I wanted. The development of the stories and character development was being happened in LA. So it made me kind of in the middle of, I'm not developing enough anymore. And the toy side is covered. I didn't like the role I had and just was a little stressed out, and kind of it was Groundhog Day after so many years of doing shows and movies of Transformers. I just needed a break, so I decided to leave. Overall, I should have probably taken a sabbatical, but I left and just wanted to try other stuff, and I was burnt out. So biggest answer is probably just burnout.
Anything you do artistically nonstop for, like you said, 13 years, you're going to kind of go, okay, maybe it'd be nice to do Batman again.
And, and honestly, if in my mindset at that time, after what we had just talked about with Michael Bay and Spielberg and these big things and movers and shakers and flying all over, the other opportunities that I maybe could have looked at seemed small and kind of not as fun. And I probably looked at it from a more arrogant point of view than I should have.
It's the old saying, everything's downhill from there, so.
Yeah, and so I just decided to shift overall than to try to try my hand at anything else. So at Hasbro. So yeah, that's kind of, it was just a long, hard-working career, and I was happy with what I'd done. And
well, you have
needed a break.
You have been a consultant recently with Hasbro.
Sure.
People who no one that I can name have stalked your resume, and they saw that you worked with Hasbro not too long ago as a consultant for some brands or something.
Sure. Yeah, I went back in 2015 and did some more marketing creative consulting on My Little Pony and Pet Shop and Hanazuki, just to expose that side of the business to more of the boys' kind of triggers on how to promote and do your brand development. Yeah, I did that for a little bit, and it was a nice thing to do. Yeah,
it still shows you have a relationship with the company in a small sense.
Sure.
We have a question here. What is your opinion of the Michael Bay movies?
Again, if I can look at them from multifacets. So, they did the job they were supposed to do with what I got paid to do and what our corporate goals were. So they were successful, and that was the goal. I like the first one more than the others, like a lot of people. I wish they had more colors and were slowed down a little bit so I could appreciate the robots more. Wish there were less sophomoric humor in them overall, versus a little more better ties to some of the classic opportunities they did take, like showing Cybertron or the 13 or different things. So it's like, I look at it like, I wish some of that stuff could have been ratcheted down better and more meaningful. So I don't know. That's where I'm at. I don't hate them or anything, but
you probably share the same thing as I do, where it has its place and it serves its purpose. That's how I've always felt. It's the same thing with people have their opinions of the prequel Star Wars movies, but they also serve their purpose in growing the brand and keeping it alive. We have a question here, and this one I think it's probably one of the last things you worked on. What was the first Age of Extinction toy made or planned? Because I know that you said you worked in the early stages of that even.
Yeah, well, we were pitching Dinobots and Lockdown and that kind of stuff. Scenarios where the Autobots were on the run, and a little bit of Mad Max Fury Road kind of hunts that Lockdown had. So it was that kind of stuff. Kind of, again, those moments and kind of interesting ways to look at. One of the things one of the things I pitched was that the ship that Lockdown had was actually powered by Dinobots that he had captured and was using their their sparks as the engines, the power source for his engines, and then they would escape, and that's how the Dinobots show up.
Okay.
The China Film Board, I think, had a different idea.
We have a question here. This is a silly one. Why did they change from using Roman numerals for Transmetal 2s from 2s to II? I guess that would have to be whoever did the packaging, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
That might be a Longueuil, Quebec question.
Yeah. I don't know how we answer that one.
What are your thoughts on third party, and could you ever see yourself doing anything in that sphere in the future?
Well, I would love to design a transforming robot. I wouldn't be as interested to redesign a Hasbro or Takara transforming robot. I've made
your feelings known on that.
A lot of time. I think it's great that people have the ability and interest to do that stuff. I wish they'd just make their own robots. I understand why there's money in the others, but I find it kind of IP theft and kind of weird that people buy products that aren't authentic and feel fine with that. They probably don't do it in any other sphere of their life.
What I've always found funny, it's just my opinion, but I've always found it funny that they buy the third-party product, pay a lot of money, and then when the official one comes out, they just get rid of that third-party one. But yet and some of those third-party products are quite pricey because of the numbers and how they're produced, obviously in smaller numbers. So it's more expensive to make. I understand why they're so expensive, but I always found it hilarious how so many times we would joke about it at TFCon with our charity auction, how whatever Hasbro would put out that would make the third-party product useless would show up at the charity auction for free because it would be donated to us. Which makes us go like, wow, But that again, third party's always been a weird thing. I've always felt that when it comes to third party, I like it when they do stuff that I know Hasbro would never do, just straight up, would never do. And those are the things that intrigue me because a masterpiece blur, I feel one day Takara is going to do it. It's just a matter of when. It's the difference. The one thing that people tend to forget, I don't want to go on a third-party rant, but the one thing that people forget with third-party is that it's multiple companies. It's not just one company that's making this stuff. It's it's got to be 24 at this point. And because there's so many companies doing so much stuff, we get so much product that comes out there that when people go, oh, how come we don't got a Masterpiece Jazz from Takara? And it's just me going it's because they have a timetable where they're going, how many masterpieces could you put out a year, realistically? And then you're allocating designers and people that are going to, do it. It's a whole process. And when you're comparing it to third party, where it's, 24 companies, and within those 24 companies, let's say there's 3 designers in each one, so that's almost easily 70 to 80 designers that are all at the same time doing their own thing, and there's so much product coming out there that they need to understand that if you want Takara to do a masterpiece blur, you're just going to have to wait when the opportunity presents itself. It's crazy. We have a question here. Where is it? I saw one good one before. Do you know the story about the original movie Lockdown and it being based on the animated appearance? Was he originally supposed to look like his animated version before the one that we have ultimately in the end, I guess, is the question.
Well, yeah. So we took the animated Lockdown look, which was largely Eric designed a lot of that guy.
Stephen Eller, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the characters that Eric designed that Derek overlaid. Some of them are opposite. Most of them are opposite. Derek was the character designer, but in that case, I think Eric's design was closer to the final. Anyway, so we took that and we jazzed it up. We made it like a black car with graphics and a more aggressive, like a Michael Bay version of Lockdown. Had the hook and everything.
To play off of that, how did you guys come to the decision to use a Lamborghini, let's say? How does that come about?
That was deals that Michael Bay made.
Okay, that's a Michael Bay.
Yeah, we would have just presented maybe a black car of any type, because we didn't have say in those deals necessarily.
Okay.
If he wanted to sign up Lamborghini, he signed up Lamborghini.
So to go back then, so like when you guys are presenting, let's go to the 2007 movie. We're presenting Bumblebee, he's going to be a yellow car. We're presenting Jazz, he's going to be some kind of car. Was it Michael Bay or Paramount that said, okay, Bumblebee is going to be a car and so on and so forth? Or was the decision really, on your end?
The art department worked with Michael Bay on the types of things he was thinking.
Okay.
And then Michael Bay had a relationship with Chevy because he used to do the Chevy commercials.
Oh, all right. That makes sense.
So if you remember the commercial where the kid is in a convertible Corvette and jumps over buildings and his hair is flying, that's a Michael Bay commercial. The commercial with the yellow truck that spins around and then backs up into the car carrier. That's a Michael Bay commercial.
You are right. I remember it was one of the extras on the DVDs. They talked about why there was so many Chevy vehicles, and Michael Bay said that
so
he had a really good relationship with them.
Yep. So he made a blank. Basically these car companies are trying to sell their brands, right? It's promotional. It's advertising. So if they'll come to the directors and say, hey, please put, James Bond producer, please put this Audi in your film. We will pay you, 50, whatever. We'll pay you money to put it in the movie, and we'll give you 3 of them for, use in the production.
Well, that's what Michael Bay said.
That kind of thing. And so that's how those deals get made. And then we negotiate with Northrop Grumman or Chevy or Boeing or whoever had the rights to the various vehicles. And they've already, in some cases, they had us over a barrel in a way. In other cases, they were fine.
I know that Michael, he said that one of the primary reasons also why going with Chevy was because he was more of a practical stunt person, where he didn't really want to use CG for a lot of the explosions and stuff. That Chevy actually offered him a whole bunch, like hundreds of junker cars that he could use for explosions and everything like that.
Yep.
I remember him mentioning that.
Yeah,
too.
he had a ton. He had access to a ton of the cars that had been damaged in Katrina.
Oh, okay, interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, so all the insurance companies and various dealerships ended up, writing off a bunch of vehicles that are damaged in any number of ways, from just water damage to worse. It could be they just can't be sold as new and stuff like that, right? So he had access to a lot of that kind of stuff.
Interesting. I didn't know that. We have a question here. How do you design a Transformer figure? Like, where do I even begin?
Any and every way. Sometimes it's about a classic character and his silhouette, how he stands, and then what car represents that attitude that character has. We've talked a lot about Blur tonight. So, he's a fast character, it's a sharp character, it's speedy. So you pick a car that represents that. You're not gonna turn that guy into a VW Bug, right? That wouldn't. So that's the character design part of it. So sometimes if it's, like I said, that a known character, you have that going in. Other times it's what do you want to do? It's also what form is it going to be packaged in, and you put more emphasis on the packaged form so that it stands out as best it can on shelf. Sometimes you build a model and then you just veneer it with a design and a character after the fact. It can literally go any way depending on the type of need and of the product.
Awesome.
Sometimes it's all in 2D and then they make a final model. Sometimes you make 3 or 4 works-like models and there's just images that you throw around from the internet to say this is what I want it to look like. It can, the model makers are very competent. Everybody's been working with these characters a long time. So whatever needs to be done to make it a reality. And different people work different ways. I was better at 2D. Some guys are better at making models to present their ideas.
This is actually my question. Do you think the process when you were last at Hasbro for making Transformers, is it still pretty much the same today? And whatever that process would be. or do you think things are different today?
I think it's more advanced. I think with easier engineering programming, you can see some of the engineering a little bit faster.
Okay.
In my day, it was so antiquated that it was almost the last of, like, they were still drawing.
It was like
on
almost like on the cusp of 3D printing, I would imagine.
Yeah, and well, even in even 3D CAD development.
Oh, really?
I mean,
That okay?
really,
Have that back.
we're talking pivot, to do the hinges and the pivot understanding. I mean, that's just how they did it, and then making styrene models. Now they can make easier CAD or electronic engineering documents, and show you a lot better. Like, I never had the ability to show anybody what these things were going to transform like until there was a model.
Mm.
You know what I mean? There was no way to like communicate what the final products were going to be. I had a beginning and an end, in the old system. Now you can kind of do some animation and show the movement and that kind of thing.
Common Pikachu wants to know, why do you think, in your opinion, the movie's earnings started to fall stateside after Dark of the Moon?
Too much, too fast.
I agree.
I mean,
Yeah.
let's not hide the fact that they're not well-written movies.
Yeah.
They don't have a lot of...
I always felt...
There's a ton of detail in there, but they skim over all of it to the point where you don't have to get invested or care that much, because, again, global market, maybe people don't even understand English that are watching it. So, that's the unfortunate bit for me. Visually, it's kind of cool, but, man, I wish the stories were better.
I always felt that in the future with film classes, they would use, at least for marketing for film classes, they would probably use the Marvel movies and the Transformer movies to show, here's how you get an audience excited to see the next movie for an ongoing story. Here's how you not get the audience excited for an ongoing story. Where it's like, you almost felt like you weren't missing anything when you went into Dark of the Moon, or, they really were almost, sometimes that's good when there's a good and bad with self-contained movies, but I think that,
I'll tell you why. Michael Bay did not, if you go back, after each movie, he said he was done.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
After every
I know where this is going. Yeah.
And if you're not going to do the next movie, you're not going to put the breadcrumbs and the effort in to make you lead to that next film.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we have 4 or 5, 6 films, they weren't designed to be a continuum 4 or 5, 6 storyline, like Marvel. It was kind of like each one, okay, we're doing another. Let's not collide with the others, but we're not really trying to lay a broad roadmap to anything and foreshadow anything and hint at a big bad guy coming over 3 movies, and then Unicron shows up. So it just, Michael didn't want to put stuff in that he wasn't going to finish and spend time and money on something that might not be the breadcrumb that's needed in the next time, which also makes sense.
No, totally, it does.
I also like to tell people that there's no other series of films that have filmed that have come out, that 4 movies coming out in the time period that they've come out without being filmed back to back. Any part of them.
Totally, I agree.
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Matrix, those all had back to back aspects to them. Transformers never had that, and they had 4 movies in like 7 years or something. Like, pretty wild.
Well, it was every second year there was a movie, and it was this big, crazy blockbuster, self-contained. It's almost like it was almost separate movies that were being made that just happened to have the same name on top of them.
Yeah.
And the same director who kept saying it was going to be the last one, like you said, but kept coming back. Someone asked here, whatever happened to those animated prototypes you talked about, the unreleased ones? Like, where are they now?
I'll conceptually tell you where they are. I don't actually know.
So they don't break in?
No, I just don't know. So in Hong Kong, there's anytime you have a toy, there's a mold and ephemera around that mold, documentation or, tampo patterns, the stickers, whatever. And at the end, of a product line that there's a decision made to hold the materials or store the materials or leave them in the factory because we're going to use them soon, or put them in deep storage, or just say we're not interested, recycle them. So every year or so, there would be a list that Hasbro, as a director, I would get, or VP, and like, do we want to use any of these tools? You know, why are we paying to store them? That kind of stuff. So I say all that to tell you, the animated items were tooled, and I think there were colored shots put in them. I don't know if I've seen painted ones.
I've only seen resin myself personally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So if the tools were made, then if they exist, they're being held in storage, probably at Takara.
Okay.
And Hasbro and Takara are probably paying thousands of dollars a year to store them, just those molds. And at a certain point, they will either pull them out and use them, pull them out and decide that the molds wasn't stored correctly and are unusable, pull the molds out and decide that the industry has moved on to such a degree they're unusable, or pull them out and say we don't want to pay for them anymore and throw them away, or hey, let's put this in production for that exclusive we're looking to do. If they, you know, and that's what happens. Sometimes
I could actually give a personal story with that myself. When working with Fun Publication, recently around that time, Takara had done a reissue of Generation 1 Fortress Maximus, and they pulled out the molds, and at that same time they also pulled out the extra molding for Grand Maximus, which had like a special Pretender shell with it, and they just pulled that out just in case if eHobby was going to do some special, you know, they always do a repaint special release, and because those were pulled out and they were already pulled out from the archives, like you said, Fun Publication went, well, hey, if you're not going to do anything with that, if you're going to put it back, could we use this Pretender mold? And that was kind of the genesis for the Pretender Megatron that Fun Publication did. It was just because those molds were pulled out. And they're like, hey, what are we doing with these? And like you said, they pay thousands of dollars to store these otherwise.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I mean, for a different time, we can talk about the engineering of toys and what happens to those molds and what it takes to keep them going and how the industry has shifted. And, you know, so that'll be it for a different day.
We have a question here. How hard is it to get Erin to a convention when this whole craziness restarts?
Well, I do a few a year. I prefer the Transformer ones over just normal comic book shows because the toy industry, you know, we don't have our names on things. So most people outside of the toy world don't always know who I am. But I'm an artist, so I sell, you know, my stuff. Anyway, I do the TF cons, most of them every year. This is obviously a weird year. It's going to be a big gap between seeing some of our friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then... you know, I try to do some regional ones in Ohio, but I'm not opposed to going to shows, but I just don't get asked to do too many. So, yeah.
We have a question. What was the most difficult timeline you had to work with, and what was the most easiest?
Armada was the longest, so by default, that was the easiest.
Okay. Because
I had a full, year of development before I had to make a final model, you know, so it really, we could investigate the car designs we wanted to use and new vehicle types we'd never made before, like Skylab and, you know, submarines and things. So that was the greatest one because you had just the most research time to really be a geeky designer. The most compressed or toughest ones, I don't know. I'd like to say I ran a pretty tight ship, so we didn't have too many things that went awry. But sometimes we get stuff thrown in on us, and we try to execute them faster than would be necessary. So we didn't talk about classics today at all.
Yeah. We're gonna get I think we covered half your career thus far, and then we'll save more for later.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so that would be an example where I could talk more about.
Well, especially when you get into that.
Decisions happen.
that
Yeah.
the post movie era, then it really flowers to a lot of different things too. There's, you're talking Titanium's classics. There's so many other brands that came out of that.
Yeah.
We have a question here. Was Armada meant for the Japanese market first, but then rushed to the U.S. market afterwards?
No. Given the time, the way we were launching it in co-development, we knew we would be launching first because our shows start in the fall in the States. So we needed shelf sets were in September, so we wanted that cartoon to launch in the fall. For the Japanese, they run full year schedules starting in January, where every weekend there's a new show.
Yeah, nonstop.
So
no reruns.
No reruns. That's the 52 episodes. After they run a certain amount of episodes, they used to put it on DVD or VHS, and that was the model. So we always knew we were ahead on Armada, and as a result, we had to accept the rush of the animation, some translation issues, there's some gaps in some animation that was made better in the Japanese version.
Yeah, there was a lot. I've talked about that in length.
They had a little more time to romance it, where we just needed it out. Yeah, and that's just how it is. We got to hit the schedule. Sometimes your shirt might not be tucked in when you show up.
Yeah. Did you ever feel limited in designing toys for the aligned continuity?
No. I was eager to try to figure some of that stuff out. That was, the aligned continuity was something of my own making, so I don't think I could have been burdened by it. I was burdened by the fact that it didn't get implemented, because of timing and just how the brand was successful in other ways. We didn't need to solve problems that didn't exist anymore.
Ninjatron has a really good question here. When you were in Japan, did you speak any Japanese?
Hi. Erin desu.
So just enough to get by.
Skosh. Hi.
That's like me with Azusa. It's the same story.
Yeah.
Just enough to get by.
I can ask where things are. I can be gestural, like, hey, what do you think of this idea? Stuff like that. Very functional in the meetings to make them comfortable and me comfortable. That we're a partnership. I respectfully wanted to learn the etiquette and some language and business stuff that would put me in a better position to do what I needed to do, and it worked out well. And I was rewarded with a very great cultural relationship because of it. So that part's the part that I miss the most, probably.
Brandon asked, I think we kind of answered this a little bit. Why was Armada released in Japan in 2003 and not in early 2002 like America? Again, cleanup.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we said before.
The animation, how animation is delivered in the different markets.
Yeah. This one's directed at me. Hey, Protoman, what's your opinion of Armada Hotshot? Everyone tends to have sour feelings for that figure. Well, what do you think, Erin? Since you worked on it, I'll give my answer.
Well, it's one of the early ones that I developed. So it doesn't have a lot of the nuance that later items could have, or how I do it today. And I was happy that they reissued it with a much cooler form in that. I guess it's still Generations line. I don't know what it was called then, but so I'm happy he got remade in a more, in my opinion, accurate look.
More updated.
But that first one's that first one. I mean, I can't totally crap on one of my early guys, but
I kind of, to answer for my side, I kind of understood where they were going with at the time, because we saw with the marketing with Beast Machines prior to that, like, oh, hey, Cheetor, that's the character that resonates with that demographic of kids who are buying it. So I looked at Hotshot and saw him. Yeah, he's the yellow Bumblebee, Cheetor, Hot Rod, kid character. Anyone who follows Japanese series, there's always that character that they know is going to be the one that sells better. I mean, we didn't really experience that here in America, but when Headmasters was in Japan, that was Wheelie. Wheelie was that character.
Yeah.
It didn't really happen over here, but over there that was Wheelie with Daniel. but yeah, so like I kind of just saw him as that, and then of course when he had that hot rod repaint, then I was kind of like, okay, I'm a little more interested now.
That was
But
pretty overt.
yeah, it was pretty cut and dry that I had to like him now. But then of course we got Rodimus the following year with Energon, so that kind of worked out in the end for me. Yep. Says here, who came up with the Cybertron Unicron toy, the deluxe one they're referring to here? Because he was one of my favorite takes on the character. This is Common Pikachu.
Yep. So that's again me doing villains. That was one of my kind of last in the last handful of toys that I did. And that was, again, you got this concept, and this happens a lot with Optimus too, and I think Armada was a good example of this, that Transformers traditionally put their iconic leader characters at the higher price points, Optimus and Megatron, and also Unicron. So what that does is in the story, it's all about Optimus, Megatron, Unicron, these big characters, but if I don't have $50 or $30, whatever, to spend, I might not be able to get the leader of the team. That's crazy, right? So that's where Bendy Optimus came from.
In Armada.
Fan named Bendy Optimus.
Yeah.
Like how do we get a
Cybertron really was like the beginning of that, because when you created that whole price point of the legend scale, where like you
that too. Yeah.
Every character of notable value was in that, what was it, $4.99 or $3.99 price point?
Because if you think about, I mean, this is going wider, but a global market, a $40 Optimus in Mexico or in Portugal, in Italy, ends up being a $70 item, a $100 item. So that means kids will never get the Optimus Prime in some of these markets unless you create a reason that you can find, and we did with Legends, sell a different way, a different perspective of how these characters are meaningful to children, and how do you get it in their hands. So long story short, with that Unicron, that's another example of, okay, not everybody's going to be able to buy a big packaged Unicron, and for Cybertron, we're not even going to probably redeco that big one again. But how do you have that character be part of this product line? And that's where I came up with the little tank around the planet.
And again, a deluxe price point, which was probably the most popular price point at the time.
Yeah, the most accessible.
Still
worldwide.
Is to this day in a lot of ways.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
it still is.
Yeah.
Let's see, what do we have here? Do you or Erin have any really juicy stories or tales of splendor while at a con or something? Like one of you, like one of you gets something or the other one wanted, or meeting interesting people. Oh, I've been going to BotCon since 2001 and TFCon since 2006, I want to say. There's tons of stories. I don't even know where to begin.
I got a lot of stories, but I don't know if I want them recorded for posterity at this point. But it was always fun to run it. For me, it was because I had different things, but it was always cool to run into people at those cons and stuff. And, you could get into crazy shenanigans for sure.
Well, I'm sure you can mention Goober, which he's going to try to do.
We got the Slurpee run tonight.
Run tonight or something, I think it is, or tomorrow. I'm not too sure what he's doing.
I think
in Winnipeg,
but that's right.
So
there's 200 miles from the nearest 7-Eleven.
I know. Jeez. It's tonight, Ninjatron. Okay, I didn't know. I forgot what the exact thing was. Where are we at here? We'll take a few more questions and then we'll call it quits for the night. Was Archer involved in the creation of Animated Lockdown, and what are the difficulties of creating a brand new Transformer character from scratch?
There's no difficulties creating a brand new character other than, are you achieving various goals that the company animation project needs? Everybody's really hip on creating new if they can. So that was that part of the question. What was the other part?
Oh, just how difficult it was. Hold on. Were you involved in the creation of Animated Lockdown?
Oh, I know. Only from the managerial side. Like, oh yeah, that seems like a cool guy. Let's bring a bounty hunter character into this franchise. That seems like a smart idea. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, like I think you mentioned
that was probably the extent of my.
I think you mentioned Eric Siebeneller, and then Derek kind of cleaned it up afterwards.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so he's mentioning here. Let's see. Okay, this is more newer stuff. Do you think the Transformers RED line will be a part of Generations or Red Packaging? This is directed at me. I'll just cover that quickly. It's going to be probably similar to how Marvel handles the Marvel Legends line, where it's going to be kind of its own thing on the side. They're talking about Masterpiece bootlegs. Guys, we'll save that for another time. Maybe tomorrow. I'm going to talk to Jaws D. We'll probably do a stream tomorrow to make up for the lack of TFCon. Let's see what we have here. When a figure is being created, what factor decides if the figure stays on the drawing board to production or not?
Well, I don't know if that comes up that way. It's basically the company decides, hey, you guys need to make a certain number next year. The marketing team looks at it and divides that up and how they can market it and sell it and chop it up. And it says, okay, to do that number, you need 200 items. Mm-hmm. And of those 200 items, the variety of price point is this, and this. Now you guys have to figure out the ideas that are going to fill those slots. That's kind of how it works. So you kind of know before you start developing a toy that you need a certain type of toy.
Well, you're not
really creating blind and endless, like with endless possibility. You kind of, hey, this will be $10. We want it to be, you
had this really good graph. I remember you had this really good graph that you showed me where it was how you were deciding like the Armada characters, and it was like this guy's going to be the tough guy, this guy's going to be this guy's going to be that. So I feel like you have to kind of plug in those things also.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, because it's, especially with Transformers, it's like there's a big difference between a hero jet and a villain jet.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So you have to do this whole complex matrix where you're not on top of yourself in form, so vehicle form, color, allegiance, in some case, duty. If you don't need a big Ironhide if you're also going to do a big Ultra Magnus.
Yeah. Totally.
You got to separate those guys out. And you could even throw in Hound in that kind of decision tree. Mm-hmm. If you do Hot Rod, you're probably not going to do Blur in the next wave. As an example, right? So it's a constant variety game where you're just always trying to bring the most variety to the shelf, or the waves.
Here's an interesting one. When creating exclusives for certain retailers, where are you given freedom to do certain homages? Example, Walmart exclusives, Dark of the Moon, Sideswipe.
Well, I don't know that particular item necessarily.
I have to reach for it.
But the exclusives were handled differently with each partner. Sometimes the partner is looking for a sweetheart deal that they can just blow out some item that we can give them at a nice cost, and it works for everybody. Other partners want to have a main character so that it's something worth promoting. Mm-hmm. In their mind, they're part of the bigger action. Other times, partners are fine with Toxitron. Whatever you guys want to do, we want an exclusive. Don't care if it's a villain, don't care if it's in the show, So it really comes down to that, who's the partner and what's the expectation, and then what is the driver at that moment? Is it just to drive people into their store, or is it to promote the movie? Is it to promote the DVD release? That kind of thing is going to be more. That's going to help decide what happens with those exclusives.
We have this one. I don't know if you're going to get this one. I understand what they're asking. Do you prefer Nitro Convoy or Override, Mr. Archer? What he's referring to is Nitro Convoy Override was a Cybertron character, was female, but was originally a male character in the Galaxy Force version. Which do you prefer?
Yes. Female.
I'm the other way about that. I love Nitro because it's the mechanic.
That was my choice. I'll tell you a funny story here.
Right.
I'm saying that just I have to say it because
Go ahead.
I created it that way.
Go ahead.
We obviously didn't have enough female characters in the program.
Mm-hmm.
The times were changing even back then, where you kind of did not want to be. We were looking to represent better. Let's say it that way. So we realized this early, and that item was in the first wave, if I remember correctly.
Wave 2, actually. Sorry.
Wave 2.
Yeah.
So earlier. Fembot. That item, as it stood that day, was the most. That was the only item that we could fake being a woman. How about that?
Oh yeah. Well,
the face was soft enough. The form was soft, angled in such a way.
It was kind of like how Air Razor could have been one or the other with the Japanese market, but by the toy.
Yeah. So it was a corporate practical decision that we had to solve for having not enough lady Transformers, and that was just the one that I chose to solve our problem.
Awesome. Good to know that one. Because within the fandom, people know Nitro Convoy, which is the male version, is one of my favorite characters. Just because anyone that's a race car character that's like obsessed with racing, so I kind of gravitated to that one throughout the years. Someone wrote here, I know you're a Hot Rod fan. If someone had a Winnebago painted like Rodimus Prime, would you consider buying it? If I have a four parking space in front of my house, that would be a big waste of space, and I love hot rods, so I don't know. If I was rich and I had all the space in the world, if I had Jay Leno's garage, sure, why not? What else do we got here? I picked up Pepsi Twist Optimus Prime. Was it worth it? I don't know. How much did you pay? Is there a Transformer convention besides BotCon and TFCon that you haven't considered going to but would want to go to? I always heard about DairyCon. I keep hearing about that one. And how weird that one is, and I would love to go to it just because of all of that. They make
I've gone to a couple different ones. I went to Sharktacon.
Oh, that one,
Charlotte.
Yeah.
But I haven't DairyCon. It's just a matter of if I've been invited or what relationships I have.
Well, let that be a shout out to DairyCon if they're interested to contact Erin.
Right. And I've done TF Nation in England as well to get over there, which was fun to
get on the other side of the ocean.
Yeah, totally different perspective of the brand, and people I hadn't met or hadn't seen so many times.
Where are we at here? We'll cover just a few more guys, and then we'll call it a night. What is your opinion of the Armada Unicron mold? Does it still hold up? This was directed at me, but I might as well just throw it at you too. Do you think it still holds up?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think
it's a centerpiece of a lot of people's collection and shelf. And
I think it still does.
So oddly colored.
I think it still does, and I mean Hasbro held on to that mold for let's see, it was 2002, and then the last time they released it was, I think 2009 was the last time. No, they did one in 2011.
Oh, they did they did the head, the new,
They did one in 2011 even. So they held, look, there's not many Transformer toys that 9 years later they're still repainting and releasing it. So, clearly even Hasbro saw value in it. Definitely getting their tooling money back.
I was happy to see that the HasLab one went, but I also knew if it didn't go, that the one we have is pretty good too. So, but it is cool that bigger version is coming and whatever. So, my time, a lot of my time on Transformers wasn't about celebrating the accuracy and the glory of the brand. It was kind of reminding people of the old glory days. So that Unicron's amazing to me.
No,
that masterpiece that I thought I had all kinds of money on. You have no idea the amount of money they had to spend on that thing.
Well, glad it wasn't a $300 item. It would have been in the end. We'll ask one more question. We'll answer two more, and then we'll call it a night. We have here, if you could get Hasbro Takara to redo one of your designs, what would it be?
Oh man, it depends on like what format, I guess. I can't answer any design related questions without more details, but you know, I would like another crack at the Armada Megatron. I don't like that redeco they did of that other tank. I like the tank, but it's not a very good Megatron. That's one. Most of the guys I really like, I don't think they should remake because they're just a little more obscure. Double Dealer and, you know, some of the Sharkticon and different guys we made. Yeah. Although, maybe my answer would be Vector Prime.
Yeah, Vector Prime would be a cool one.
Would be Vector Prime. Because while that toy is kind of cool for what it is, it could really be enhanced and made really cool by what we can do today with the technology.
Not to mention, that's a trademark that they need to freshen up anyways. So that'd be another...
Probably.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There hasn't been a Vector Prime in a while. In a very long time.
So shout out to anybody who plays Mobile Legends. I am Vector Prime in Mobile Legends. So
are you?
Track me down, yeah.
Okay, there you go. And then the last question is going to be, do designers read TFW 2000 the others do?
Off and on. I don't think it was... Different people treated information gathering is what I would call all of that. Going to any website or board or news site to find out what people were thinking and what's happening and what's been leaked and, you know, what PR is released and all the information. It was all that stuff was